Yo,
Was
that was
Rob did it. uh,
A few kids are old enough to remember that one.
God. That was around the Budweiser frogs.
Exactly.
oh, good.
Exactly.
Yo, bring it back. We need to say Bud Light, you know?
No, abandon that fucking ship.
Am I underdressed? Does mean I have to put clothes on?
No, no, no. Please do. We got to get the
Rock
ladies
it.
on here somehow. I don't think it's going to be our conversation that's going to draw 'em.
I just loved how last time we just did it naturally.
It
All
was,
showed up,
yeah, it just
tits
felt
out.
right. When the moment feels right, it's like,
When
what
the
can you
record
do?
when the record button's off, we show up tits out.
They don't need to know about the NIPS verification.
Dude, how are they going to say Bud Light? They should sell it to Dave Portnoy. Just sell the whole brand to Portnoy. Give him it, like sell it for $1
Oh,
and just
there you go.
come bring back all the frogs and the stupid advertising, the beer girls. You could save it.
Ain't nobody want to see that shit. Referring to all of our topless bodies.
Well, I guess I'll put some
speak-
clothes on.
Yeah.
I mean, you do your thing, Rob. I'm telling you what to do. I mean,
Oh, you're the one that started it, John.
if any of ours, yeah,
I think you should rock. I think you should rock it. Yeah, you should rock it with no shirt.
I'm putting clothes on.
Did you guys see that meme about how, like, when the right boycotts something, it causes a $30 billion loss for a company, and when the left does, they cause for a #1 music hit to happen?
Yeah,
I thought that was pretty good.
That's actually a super interesting point on just where things are at.
It sure is.
yeah. The left has all of this cultural power, and the right has still significant economic power, but literally no cultural power at all. Like,
By the way,
Does
I'm
the left have cultural power though? I mean,
Yeah.
like they do.
yeah, they do. They do.
they think they're in the right, because it's all based on feelings, and like if it feels like a really good thing, then it like must be true. So like we need to go through with that. And so like they feel really good about redirecting money towards the poor. And so like that must be the right thing to do,
Have you, speaking of that, have you seen all these videos of, I think, Canadian women, like middle-aged Canadian women crying on Twitter recently? I think you've reposted one, Eric.
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon. One thought though, like, and the plight of the average middle-class Canadian is I'm empathetic towards, but also I was like, the woman was giving this monologue from like a vehicle that had leather seats and stuff, and I was like, how poor are you really if you have leather seats? You can't be that poor,
When people were pointing out she only wanted to work 3 days a week too.
Yeah, have you thought about a cloth, a fabric interior? Just spitball in here.
Well, like it's interesting because the way I've seen the left frame it up is like same thing from the song about how it's criticizing men north of Richmond, but then it also criticizes 5'3", 300-pound women buying fudge rounds. And like the left is like it, like if you see the problem, like how it is welfare something, and they don't seem to understand that like the problem inherently is about this generalized use money for whatever you feel best is.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know.
I'm just gonna spark this up live. You're all good with that? You can continue talking.
Yeah, I thought it was.
Sorry.
Should we keep talking about the Oliver Anthony thing?
Yeah, why not? I saw that on Wikipedia, inflation was labeled as a right-wing issue or identifier or something like that. I mean, not surprised at this point because Wikipedia has been like that for a while, but
yeah,
just chalk it up to another clown world manifestation.
Well, I think it is important to understand that from their perspective, it absolutely is a right-wing thing, because from their perspective, like Keynesian is a truism. The state has the unitary right to issue money, and ergo the freedom of money is a right-wing issue.
These are kind of the same people I saw when inflation was starting to run hot. Chamath Palihapitiya comes to mind, where they said that inflation's actually going to be good for the poor, beneficial. No, it's never good for the poor.
What was his
ever.
reasoning on that? I feel like I remember that.
His reasoning in specific, I think, was it's going to make nominal wages go up, but it doesn't matter if, I mean, that's a trick, right? It doesn't matter if all of the food at the grocery store is more expensive. Like, yeah, okay, you make $30 an hour. great. But what, how much is your food and your gas and your utilities and
It's
your
an
rent?
optical illusion. I always call it a cognitive optical illusion. You think
Right.
you're making more money, but you're getting debased faster than the nominal is going up. So it's a trick.
Exactly.
What's,
It's
I
like
mean,
$15 an hour minimum wage. Nobody talks about that anymore because that's meaningless. That's meaningless, right?
what do you mean?
Well, $15 minimum wage is something that was a hot political topic 7 years ago or something, and
Like
now
they were fighting for it.
they were
Yeah.
fighting for $15 minimum
Right,
wage.
right.
Yeah. Minimum wage in America is below $15.
Right.
And now with all of the money printing and all of the inflation, like $15 minimum wage is not something that anybody wants to fight for, because $15 is not a lot of money anymore. I mean, you go to a decent restaurant, a hamburger costs more than $15, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, to your point about those videos, and I just assume they're genuine, where people are emotional about their inability to like cover the cost of living. I mean, obviously, we talked about this for years, even before all the COVID stuff happened, right? Like this is just, it's a continuation and acceleration of a trend that's been happening for a long time. And like, the rich don't see it because they're insulated from it and because they've actually benefited from the thing. But like, for your grocery bill to go up 30, 40, 50%, cost of energy going up by something similar, for a lot of people, that's just is devastating. And everyone's suffering these lives of quiet desperation, right? Because you don't even have time to like be vocal about it, because you're like, you're trying to survive. You're trying to feed your family. You're trying to do the like, and this is the crazy grinding, like soul sucking element of all this, is that like, it doesn't, spring up in a thing that you can just put the TV cameras on and be like, here it is. Of course you can show rising prices and stuff, but the despair that so many people feel as a result of this, and many of whom, of course, they realize that like they don't have as much disposable income, or they can't make ends meet, but many of them don't even really, they obviously can't they're not putting all the pieces of the puzzle together. But I have so much sympathy and empathy for those people, because you end up just feeling super trapped, right? You're like, well, can I work another job, or can I get a better paying job? And if the answer is no, and obviously it's all related. I mean, this is why you see the homelessness and the drug crisis like ramping up. Yes, I know the southern border is a huge factor of that, but like when people get into these states of desperation, emotional strife, obviously a certain portion of them reach for the bottle, for the syringe, for the candy bar, the whatever, and so you get these epidemics of drug abuse, of homelessness, of obesity. Like obviously it's all wrapped up, right? And I think part of the thing that we've identified in Bitcoin land, not that, anyone's perfect or anything, but when you can kind of elevate from those concerns, when you can kind of build an integrated life, where your money and your future is secure, and you're working on other elements of your life, like the requirement for those emotionally instigated activities is dialed down a lot, right? I mean, we still party and drink and that kind of stuff, but like obviously overeating and drug abuse and that kind of stuff is a response to apathy, despair, pain, strife, all that kind of stuff, and so it's so crazy that we're talking about the kind of left wing, right wing framing of a lot of this stuff, that no one really talks about all that taken together. I mean, they're used individually as like political talking points, and to try to one up on your political opponents, but just it's so in your face everywhere. It's so obvious, but it's the thing nobody is talking about, seemingly. Or
I think the holistic term for that sort of cluster that you were just mentioning is diseases of despair.
Right.
And certainly if you've been to the American South or the American Heartland, anytime in the last 10 years, I mean, it's these towns are desolate. Rural communities have been absolutely decimated. And, there's this idea that like, white people have privilege in America. Go out to rural Iowa and tell me the people there have privilege. Like they are living really hard lives that are mired with drug addiction and abuse and, factory work and broken families and all the same kind of problems that are in inner cities, right?
Well, the one that blows my mind is the 100,000 fentanyl or opioid overdoses deaths a year in the US right now. Like that is just the most absurd number you could think of. I mean, that's a Vietnam and a half every year, basically. And again, it gets so little press. And there's so many obvious things you could do to, you know, to at least begin addressing it. I think we'd all agree that the money is at a root of, you know, a lot of those problems, but something as simple as like stop letting millions of people a year coming through the border with those drugs, you know, that's possibly one of the steps. But just that, like, why isn't that on the news topic every night on the news? You know, I know why it's not, but like, shouldn't it be 100,000 young people dying a year of drug overdoses? It's insane.
I mean, I'm coming more and more to the conclusion that this is assuming that the political apparatus is something designed to empower us.
Right,
right. Like it's becoming clear to me that like we live in open air prison camps where the terms of our lives are decided outside of any capacity for us to decide. And that's why 100,000 young men and women are allowed to die this way, is because it's part of a general campaign to do that. Like they don't care. There isn't some political appeal to help save these people. And this is the huge crime right now, is that there's no ethics, there's no morals. So it's just about raw subjective exploitation, because what's another body matter? You know, and it's extremely dark and terrifying.
Is this sorry.
No, we just have to come to terms with that. And it's terrifying. And that's why there's so much agony and despair, because also people can't locate a solution. And so the only thing they do is to die in despair. And it's horrible.
Agreed completely. I was just going to say, you know, for all the flack that social media gets, I think maybe this highlights one of its benefits, actually, is that, as you said, John, this is not covered at all in the mainstream media, or hardly at all. But these emotional videos, you know, the ones I've seen have largely been women, you know, middle class wage earners just getting squeezed, you know, people making $30, $40 an hour getting fucking wrecked. But these, you know, we had on our Instagram thing, our biggest reel ever before this was like 1 million, right? And that was a huge outlier. Our reels typically do like 20 to 50,000 views. We posted one of those. I'm just saying the root cause of this is central banking, specifically the Fed, and it did like 5.5 million. So it's striking a real chord with people, right? To like look someone in the face and see the emotional turmoil that people are going through directly because of an economic problem. And it's almost like, I don't know that people are going to get it, obviously, because there's still a lot of plausible deniability the state has in relation to inflation, right? It's Putin's fault. It's the supply chains. It's Beyonce, like whatever the fuck they want to say. But at least people are looking the right direction, or more so as a result of social media, that you've got eyes closer to the problem, obviously not maybe all the way to the root. But people are looking the right direction, at least. And this whole idea of people working longer hours, you know, eating less or shittier food, moving into smaller places. I mean, this is what Bitcoiners have been saying for years, right? This is systemic time theft. And so we're just seeing the victims now pile up.
There seems to be, you know, some non-trivial amount of people that occupy elite perches in society who hold the belief that the planet is overpopulated and needs to be vastly depopulated, right? And I think that sort of Malthusianism is terrifying. And I've heard the term used, useless eater. And so when you talk about, you know, 100,000 fentanyl deaths, in the I'm not saying this, but in the eyes of the person who, you know, is trying to architect the system for, you know, some sort of Georgia Guidestone, 500 million people on the planet, those people were useless. And that's why they don't care about their deaths. So maybe they're not shipping the fentanyl over from China. Maybe that's a Chinese thing as a reaction to the, you know, the opioid wars. I don't know what that is or where that comes from, but like certainly nobody over here is doing anything to stop it, because actually having less people consuming resources is seen to be a good thing by some of the people that we have in power, which like, again, just to be on the record, that's abhorrent, it's awful thinking. And I think that we should have 10x more humans on the planet. That's my worldview. So I hold the opposite worldview to most of the people we have making decisions.
I think so much of this, you can, and all of us often do, chalk it up to like I'm sure there's bad people in positions of power, but like kind of a conspiracy of interest, right? Which is why we always talk about the incentives, right? Because another part of that border thing might be Democrats want to flood the place with people that they think are going to vote in their favor, right? That's at least a common rationalization for having a laissez-faire attitude to what's happening there. So that's another one. And you wonder, like, well, where do these perverse incentives come from? Like, and obviously, I think all of us would agree, like, at some point they wind up in the money printer and the powers that are bestowed as a result of being able to control that thing. But yeah, I mean, it's everywhere, right? And we've often talked about in the past, like, does it have to get worse to get better? And I think we all kind of said, like, yes. However, do you guys feel like this year, probably as a result of a lot of the shenanigans that went on during COVID, like the pendulum is actually swinging like in the good direction? Can we be cautiously optimistic that there's a good vibe prevailing, and that some of these issues, I mean, I know it's the legacy system, but the presidential candidates, at least on the GOP side, a lot of these issues are coming up, and they seemingly are being received very well by the people that these candidates are speaking to. So it seems like, one, there's a willingness and a courage to address and speak about these issues. But two, there seems to be a commensurate hunger from people to have them spoken about. So are we coming back? Like, is the pendulum swinging or what?
This is episode 4 of Star Wars. It's A New Hope. We have to wait for the Empire to strike back, and then after that, we'll have the Return of the Jedi, and that's what has to happen. I mean, I see all the signatures of the pain. The fact that Bitcoin is still as nascent as it is in the light of all of these things shows the dramatic and gross misunderstanding of it and the general problems. And I think pain has to get much more intense and direct before people truly come to kind of understand what it is. And also, I want to point, like, we are squarely in the middle of what will be labeled far-right fascism, and I'm really happy that we get to spend a lot of time together in the Rex 84 camps. It's going to be, I mean, outside of the waterboarding, it's going to be nice to spend time with you guys.
Yeah, I agree, and I like the Star Wars analogy. But
I fucking disagree. I'm not going to the fucking camps. Are you kidding me?
I agree that it would be nice to spend time together.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I'm not going to the camps either.
There's actually, I've been doing a lot of reading around Holocaust legal theory, and one of the things I've found the most interesting is this idea of a free person. I think at this point in time is actually extinct. And this is one of kind of the most radical things about Bitcoin, cryptography, and the internet that I see, is that, like, anons are these, like, free figures that can actually, like, come in and influence and speak truth in a way that, like, no flesh bag has anymore. And I see it ultimately as, like, that's why Satoshi Nakamoto is this, like, anonymous liberator. Like, he was actually a free person in a free territory, and he extended this gift to us. And, like, now the question is what do we do with it?
Do you think there ever was a free person? Like, we have this seemingly a romantic notion that now we're, like, really in the thick of it, but before there were, like, when would you say was the freest period to be an individual in, as what we know of human civilization or history?
It was before the invention of the nation state. So the Treaty of Westphalia in 1648, I would say, would be the actual demarcation of where that happened, because statism interlocked everything in geography in such a way that, like, all things everywhere were ultimately owned by the state, which is also why an extension in the final age, where we have what I like to call the hyperstate, it seeks to surveil everything everywhere all the time and infinitely expand its grasp, while it ultimately wants to find itself in space so it can control all topological area at all points in time with all people under them, under every single form of punishment and crime possible. Like, it wants a totality that equivocates itself to God, which is an absolute impossibility, but that's why it tries to manifest itself as such.
This relates back to a conversation I saw Rob having online with Peter McCormick about the amount of attacks that was due from Pharaoh's slaves to Pharaoh. I mean, we used to live in a world pre the Treaty of Westphalia, pre the nation state, where, yeah, you had to render unto Caesar what was Caesar's. Like, yeah, you were going to get stolen from, you were going to have to pay tax. I mean, that was how it went. And 20% is certainly a lot less than most people are paying in tax now, right? But, you know, it was okay to render unto Caesar's what was Caesar's, because your thoughts and your beliefs and the conversations that happened in your kitchen were sacred. Those were yours. And also nobody gave a shit about them anyway. Whereas now it's like, you know, what happened in the, or what Oliver Anthony was talking about in his song, which is like, they want to know what you think and they want to know what you do. And they don't think you know, but I know that you do, right? So he's basically saying like, these people want total control. They want to know every thought that you have. They want to be able to surveil you at all points. And like, the truth is most people don't live very interesting lives and they're not actually worthy of surveillance. So like, why are you surveilling the average American at their kitchen table when they're talking about, you know, the football game? It doesn't make any sense. Why are you doing that? Right? Like you're way over the mark in terms of your role as, you know, regulator, basically.
Well, this is the same reason why the, you know, 1 in 4 people in East Germany were part of the Stasi. Like this isn't about monitoring their crimes. Like this is about creating a docket to surveil people and ultimately be able to leverage them in the direction you want. Like we're, particularly with the sort of technology we have, like we're descending into an extremely terrifying place that like I actually think is fundamentally eschatological, because like it seems to be a problem of evil. And when I use the word evil, that is a specific form of thoughtlessness. And like this is what's interesting about the Holocaust stuff I'm reading is, in all of the Holocaust trials, the individuals who literally killed tens of thousands of people themselves made the argument that they were a good citizen. They were following duty, obeying what was told of them, and that they had to do that, and that was the only path forward. And Ardent points out, like, this is evil because it's literally incapable of a self-reflecting thought about what they're doing ethically to the other person. They only care about what they're doing towards the state, not their other human being.
I would say too, to add to that, evil is the force which believes its knowledge is complete.
The state.
So just like what you said, right? The totality of surveillance across all geographies at all times. Like, what is that? That's evil,
And
right? You're
I think
trying.
That's literally the eye of Sauron. That is
Yes.
literally the eye
Yes.
of Sauron.
But
You know?
the reason, the fact of that being an impossibility of having complete knowledge means that in their attempts, they have to flatten everything, right? Because they're attempting to normalize everything in order to have knowledge over it and control over it. And so that you have these two competing forces, or this mega force on a falsehood, which is, you know, complete knowledge. But in your attempts to believe, or as you believe you have that, or in your attempts to act on that, you have to squash everything. I mean, this is kind of what happens in communist places, right? Like everyone's ends up wearing the same shoes and the same clothes and having the same thoughts. Like you need to flatten everything to actually have any chance of acting as though your knowledge is complete and acting like you have that type of control.
And the
It's
culmination.
important to link that to the materialistic perspective of Marxism. I think that's really important because at the end, it always has to do that smashing because of its materialistic perspective.
Right.
And the culmination of that totalizing knowledge is, right, equality of outcome. There's only one possible equality of outcome for humans, and that's the grave. It's the only place we are all actually equal. And that's why it trends towards this like totalized, surveilling, killing machine. It's the expression of human evil at the highest echelon.
And you wind up there because you, in any attempt to express diversity, right, to counter trend that desire to flatten everything, that's how you're punished, right? And being that we all are different, we all are individuals, inevitably, you know, nearly everyone winds up doing that in some capacity as the flattening narrows, and everyone is at least perceived to be too individual, too different, too divergent.
What's
that's
that
how you
proverb?
end up in the grave.
The tallest blade of grass is the first one cut, something like that.
Right. Tall poppy syndrome, they call it in Australia, I think.
But with this smashing, we get equality. Now that I've crushed all of your opportunity, well, and like this is like the monkey cage thing, you know, like we're all starving to death together. So like now we're equal, right? Like you're equally hungry to my hunger as well. And like you're subjected to the same state that wants to destroy you as me because we're equals under the law. And what I think is so interesting is that this form is designed to materialize and dehumanize the other and to make them into a subject. So like I can't recognize the divine essence in you that has infinite possibilities that I could never contain. Like, I must lock you into the state as well, because if you're beyond the power of the state, like, this means that you're something transformationally different from me, and you must be destroyed.
Yeah, there's also like, we're all part of being a human being. We're social animals, we're social creatures, is being mutually, interdependent. Like, what's the worst thing you can do to a human being is throw them in solitary confinement away from other human beings, right? And so, like, that's a truism. Like, we are all mutually interdependent on one another, right? But the lie comes in where we need an interstitial layer that is, some sort of regulating authority that tells us just how interdependent and how much tax they're owed for acting as the authority between us. And it's like, that's just such bullshit. And if we can find a better way to organize without having an intermediary like that, then we can have a better world, right? And then that gets you to the rules-based system that is Bitcoin, and like somewhat, the idea of the network state potentially, or, whatever you want to call that idea. Like, the new Leviathan is the network, right? And the network is a rules-based order that's enforced by machines and can't be co-opted by human beings. And so you have this sort of, archetypal, like, gravitational force weighing down on all of us equally that can't be manipulated by any one human being. And that's the next step, we think.
That's not just I'd point out that the problem I have with the term network state is that it doesn't integrate the ideas and principles of cryptography to it. So I once read a paper that postulated that this new thing that's like this kind of encrypted, decentralized Bitcoin sort of base system is something called the cipher net. And to me, NOSTR represents like one of the reasons my thesis is called crypto sovereignty is I didn't want to eliminate the possibility of other cryptographic protocols such as NOSTR from being able to come up, because I ultimately think it's going to be this plethora of FOSS tools that are ultimately going to create the base of this new political movement, which, to be very clear, like, I find Bitcoin to be the only thing political today because it is the only object that has the capacity and organizational possibility of creating a totally new form of the political. And when I say the political, I'm talking about something that is beyond the nation state, to actually organize ourselves in a meaningful way to have law that can actualize justice. Because the current form of law that we have, justice is an absolute impossibility. And reading in Holocaust theory, it's amazing to read about these men who personally killed hundreds of children and got off with like 5 years. Like, it's fucking disgusting. And to think if you then go and kill that motherfucker, you can go to jail. That eliminates the possibility of justice from even existing.
Eric, do you mean, not to be a stickler, but to be fair, like, there are probably a great number of instances where in narrow cases, and let's say perhaps not politically motivated ones or politically charged ones, where the justice system seems to get it right, let's say in the States. Are you saying that is not a sufficient form of justice, or that, like, can you comment on that?
Sure, because so, guy rapes woman, gets put on trial, put in jail. President goes to a private island dozens of times. Seems like he raped children there openly. Nothing happens about it. And so that
right, so but that's justice setting for a particular
and
class,
what I'm saying
right?
is that, so what it does is that through offering this sort of petty justice towards individual crimes, it opens up a possibility for fundamentally crimes against humanity and war crimes to never actually be sought and tried, because of the way that the political class has actually allowed for themselves a total expropriation of the law and creating this tiered system. And that tiered system itself, if we talk about law from a philosophical standpoint and the capacity to actualize justice, if we have these crimes that are so huge and so extraordinary that they literally explode the entirety of framework of the law, and this is kind of interesting because this gets back to one of the things that Schmitz points out, like, these are people that are actually enemies of all of humanity. Like, we don't even need law to see the horrific travesty that this was, and actually, like, the superiority of us as individual beings and humans takes superiority over this legal form, because it's an actual ethical question as opposed to a philosophical one about trying to fulfill justice. So I think it's
with the Nazi people that were on trial, you mean?
Yeah, well, and to me, what World War II represented, and specifically the trials that came afterwards, Like this showed that the crimes were so huge and horrific that it literally shipwrecked the entirety of the framework of what we considered law, because the way that one state hijacked the entirety of the political system and carried out one of the most deadly events in all of human history. And there was no way to ever come back from that.
So what do you do in such a case? Pre-Bitcoin, do you give up on the notion of justice and justice system? Like, what's the play?
This is one of the interesting things is, so after World War II, we just saw the development of the hyperstate, more and more of the economy committed towards war and products of mass destruction, a two-dimensional society where people were being further and further exploited by propaganda. And frankly, after 9/11, we found ourselves in the depths of a cage that was so deep and dark that the product of what's going on today is a sort of nihilism that's so totalizing and complete that the possibility of even getting out of this fucking nightmare seems utterly impossible. And I think within this, Bitcoin produces itself as this miraculous thing that traces the entire concourse of human history utilizing cryptography and the organizational principle that comes from solving the Byzantines' general problem, which even though this is a computer science problem, it is fundamentally a military problem about what is the law and what happens when you want to organize a strike against a corrupt government that's taken over a city, despite the fact that you have a plurality of people, you know? And so to me, like, Bitcoin is actually the political solution to how we politically organize to reclaim our respective republics, because of the way that we can solve the Byzantine general's problem.
Well, yeah, just the two-tier system you brought up. It seems like it's fundamentally unjust. It's not possible to have a just two-tier system.
And that's what I'm trying to point out.
Yeah, so long as you have people inside the law and outside the law, justice is almost by definition unattainable. If it's people getting what they deserve, and the equality, this is why equality is such a fucked word, because it needs to be decomposed, right? People throw it around as if, oh, we should have equality of outcome, which, as we said, ends in the grave. But the equality we actually seek is equality in the eyes of the law, right? We all want to play the same rules of the same game. And that's where, that's where Bitcoin shines, right? We're only within the laws of Bitcoin, as far as man-made laws go, are we all actually equal.
Well, there's no longer these.
Seem to be a way to change that.
There aren't these exceptional figures anymore. Like the two-tiered system that has some people be beyond the capacity of being captured by the law is the exact same mechanism that puts people below and outside the law, like the enemy combatant, people at Guantanamo, and Julian Assange, all of these other people. And it goes to show that to me, like, this is what the illusion of trying to say that we have law is. And this is one of the things that statists decry, is they go, well, like chaos and anarchy, if we don't have this thing. I'm like, it's no, chaos and anarchy is the reorganizational principle of us getting back towards that, which I understand is scary. But don't try to justify the fact that the state is delivering justice when literally literally the greatest crimes that have ever been committed against humanity were only possible under the organizational form of the state. And like, going back to Holocaust theory, like, it's fucking insane that the death camps were created from the concern that the Nazi commanders had for their own people because of how much psychological trauma was happening from them killing people. Like, I was reading in the Einshof-Grofen trials that, like, literally they would only kill people in group firing squads so that individual men couldn't take responsibility for individual killings. Like, it's fucking nuts. So they're like, oh, let's just like train everybody, gas them in these huge gas chambers, and we've like sped the whole process up way faster than we could have done before. It's fucking nuts.
Did you read the book Ordinary Men?
Mm-mm.
It's basically about I think they were a Nazi battalion stationed in Poland, I want to say. Mm-hmm. But in any case, the punchline is that it was a group of otherwise normal men, right? Like butcher and accountant and whatever, and they were enlisted and they had to participate in what you just described. And it kind of chronicles the process of them first, like, having a very difficult time with it, understandably, right? Like, many not wanting to be involved, vomiting, being ill afterwards, not being able to, sustain or deal with the stress of such a horrific situation. And then, just the slow creep of normalization that happens there, that happened there. And that happens in so many cases. I mean, that's an extreme case, right? But I mean, all the different elements and ingredients of normalizing unethical, immoral, destructive behavior. I mean, they're all around us still today, right? Again, the in most cases, the edge is taken off. There's smaller scale examples of something similar, but just, you know, the COVID thing was an example of how just, you know, the hysteria, basically, you know, how people can be coaxed and massaged and affirmed and coerced into doing something, and then almost necessarily having to rationalize it in order for them to be able to continue doing it, right? Like, you need to find a way to tell yourself that you're not evil. I think that's kind of what you were alluding to, Eric. And I think that's like, that's the road to hell is paved with good intentions. That's the banality of evil. That's like, it's evil's capacity to guise itself as good that allows it to propagate to the extent that it does. And it would seem that the only way that you can counter that is these enterprises of elucidating moral structures and behaviors, which I think the prime example throughout history has been religion, because how else are you supposed to assert a counter to those sort of psychological phenomena that seem, you know, prevalent everywhere and that continue to repeat? And it's different now with Bitcoin, but
speaking of things repeating, I mean, and the Nuremberg trials, I've been reading through Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, and when you read about the history in Germany between World War I and World War II, and specifically the rise of Hitler and Goebbels and Goering, it sounds a lot like present day America, man. I mean, it sounds fucked. Like, we are certainly barreling towards something awful, and I don't know the specifics of what it is, but I know the winning move is to stay out of harm's way while it attempts to maim and destroy as many individuals as it can.
Well, I don't think we have it's interesting because, like, there's no far right counter to, like, because the other thing is, like, communists were like a big thing in Berlin all the way up through the 30s until the Nazis cleaned shop. And it's really interesting because, like, 1930, there was like a very serious crisis, and it wasn't clear like if Germany was going to go in a fascist direction or in a communist direction, but it was going one of two ways.
Yeah.
And that's what I feel. But the thing that creeps me out is there's no organizational form yet outside of, because, like, it seems like the left has been absorbed into the state. And this is one of the things that I'm afraid of, is that it doesn't seem to understand its perspective has now become something much more benign than what it claims to be. And that's one of the strangest things to me. And same thing with the right.
More benign?
Yeah, like it has a hard time defining itself or offering principles or ideals. And this is like one of the things that I find so insane about leftism is like the support Ukraine thing. And I was like, 20 years ago, you guys were like doing radical action against all forms of war. And like now you guys are celebrating forms of war. Like, what's happening here? Because like that was an ethical principle that they asserted. And so they've like done the crazy mental gymnastics to justify Ukraine. And like, it's really wild to me because I don't understand it.
20 years ago, the left was anti-war and pro-free speech. And now they're pro-war and anti-free speech. Like, make it make sense. It doesn't make any sense.
Isn't this the puppet show, though? Isn't that the whole point? Is like you keep people trapped in the left-right dichotomy, and you can just invert the meanings. So you keep people fighting amongst themselves, and the animosity not directed at the political apparatus itself.
Yeah,
just basic divide and conquer, you think?
Yeah, and just keep flipping it, right? Keep flipping the scripts and keep people confused. How are they ever going to unify and overthrow you?
Yeah, it does keep them. It keeps people very stuck in, like, this is one of the things I find the most fascinating is if you talk to people about politics, they think of everything inside of the framework of like electoral politics, passing legislation and amendments. And like, it doesn't include this revolutionary principle of taking down a government, reorganizing it, just, you know, destroying various extrajudicial organizations and agencies. And even the very idea of something like that existing, like, confounds them. Like, I found this in the like, hey, like, take out as much debt, buy as much Bitcoin, give the middle finger to the lender. Everybody's like, but they'll sue you. Like, do you? And it's like, you dumb motherfucker. Like, that still doesn't get your Bitcoin from you. And like, what do you do if you go to a jurisdiction you can't get taken from? Like, like, look, I get it's a very extreme idea, but like, people can't even see outside of the framework of this. And that's the same bullshit thinking that has people be like, well, there's no way cryptography could resist the NSA because they're the magicians of cryptography, so they must have solved everything. And it's just like, you dumb motherfucker, like try to think things through, please. Oh,
I think there's a subconscious recognition too, and it's part of the reason for, I think, a lot of the despair and apathy and stuff is that, as Eric's been saying, you know, the state has become so powerful relative to the individual that, you know, there's an implicit recognition that you have to conform your perspective to its perspective, you know, or that's the path of least resistance, you know. So it's the Stockholm syndrome sort of deal, right? Where you're just like, well, if I go against it, and the retributions are more and more like, if any of us had been like at the Jan 6 protest and we were having this conversation now after having been like black bag for a few months or years as a result of being in proximity of that, we would probably have a much different, you know, impression of just like how justice is working in this country and how far along on this process, you know, comparing it to perhaps 1930s Germany, things actually are in the United States. But I think in general, the reason why those inversions are so, you know, they can pull them off, whereas anyone rationally thinking about it would be like, how can you square the fact that your stance was completely inverse or opposite, you know, a decade ago? I think it's just because there's just the imbalance of power and influence and control is such that, you know, all the signals you're receiving and all the incentives you're receiving simply force you to conform your perspective to the dominant perspective because it's too painful to be divergent from.
I don't know anything about conforming, John. I'm a registered Democrat, and we don't do that. I'm with her. In this house, we believe in science. Black Lives Matter.
Well, and it's about this crushing of the individual in such a way that they can't think. And like when I say think, I truly mean the proof of work process that goes into, you know, like showing how you did your math and being like A to B to C to D, and like this is why. Whereas most people literally take authoritarian decrees, something they were told by the experts, whether it's science or whatever else, and they just like plug that in. Like I had the most infuriating conversation with a leftist the other day where she was like, if everybody was just a vegan, like tomorrow the world would be better. And I was like, look, man, like there's so much wrong here. And I was like, how do you even get like the soil inputs to create that world? And she's like, well, here's this scientific paper. And I'm like, again, you like don't seem to understand that like the scientific paper is not the science itself. And there's this disjuncture that keeps getting wider here that to me points out the general latent authoritarianism that most people seem to have. And I find it terrifying because like you ask them to think and like they can't put it together, you know? And that's why you get a lot of really stupid people doing a lot of really stupid shit.
I saw a guy in a store yesterday and he was the only person wearing a mask, you know, and I thought to myself, what kind of an asshole I would be if I ran up to him and was like, hey, take off your fucking mask. All right, take it off. Right. I would never do that. I saw this gentleman. I thought, and then I went about my day. Right. But meanwhile, you know, I was walking through a casino in Vegas with Rob. Me and Rob are both some pretty big dudes. You know what I mean? And a girl, you remember this, Rob? A girl came up to us like, put on your fucking mask, put on your mask, like that. And I was just like, all right, listen, we're nice guys, but you should actually be afraid of us. You know what I mean? Like we're much larger than you are, right? You should never speak to me this way, okay?
No. She has the backing of the state, and the state can come and fucking shoot you at any point in time. And you're in the wrong, so why shouldn't she, as this tiny woman who could never enforce these things herself, why shouldn't she get in your face and agitate you and piss you off? Because she knows that there's a big fat guy back there who has a gun that when he sees there's some guy in a conflict, he's just going to blow your head off. And I think this is really interesting because this is what's going on.
It's precisely the idea of agents in the Matrix, right? I mean, like it's such a perfect, I mean, that movie has a lot of amazing metaphors and representations and stuff. But like, as you say, Eric, I mean, she otherwise wouldn't ever have most likely not have done that. But because, you know, she feels this force behind her that's invigorating with that, you know, that power and that, you know, moral high ground supposedly to be that way, you know, the confidence and everything else required to do that is generated as a result of that. So she's very much an avatar of that state authority and power.
This is a perfect video. Did you see the or in Stockton, the Sikhs who work the gas station? You see this video where
Oh
a
god.
guy is just stealing. He's just stealing as much stuff as he can and putting it into his bag, and just goes, you can't do fucking nothing about it because California has these weird new laws where you're not supposed to stop shoplifters in the act, right? And at some point, he keeps going, you can't do anything, you can't do anything, and he kind of pulls a knife. And the Sikh guys are like, green light. And they just start whacking him with the broom handle as hard as they can. And it's the best video because the guy goes from being like, you can't do anything to me, I'm invigorated by the power of the state of California, to being like, oh shit, stop beating me. Stop beating me. Right. And it's very fantastic.
Didn't the guys beating them with the broomstick get in trouble though?
Yep.
They
Yep,
said
they're
they
being
weren't
tried.
going to prosecute them. And then they doubled back. And I believe they are prosecuting them, right?
Yes.
Such bullshit. Such
Well,
bullshit.
To be clear, and like this is the same thing that was going on in Nazi Germany, is that now the political apparatus that is supposed to be neutral and care about all citizens, it has been politicized. And now they're using that apparatus in the same mechanism that, frankly, the Communist Party utilizes to implement party ideology into the state itself.
Yeah.
And so instead of the justice system being this thing that establishes law and justice, we have a two-tiered system that's applying itself politically through ideology. And it's really scary because like this is what COVID introduced, was the ideology of their science and what they get to call science, and how that is then going to be carried forward. It's
So
really
if you were a Nazi stormtrooper and you went out and brawled in the street with a communist, around the time that Hitler took over, and you murdered the communist in cold blood, which often happened, and you found yourself before a judge, the judge was scared to death to sentence you appropriately, right? And that sounds an awful lot like what we're seeing in American judicial systems today. Like people are scared to mete out the appropriate level of justice because of retribution.
Well, and similar to the January 6th thing, like the first thing that Hitler did when he came to power was he passed a new law that retroactively rolled back the capacity to use the death penalty for the Dutch individual. Germany across the board was at, oh fuck,
You're back.
I'm
There
back.
you go. You're back.
So, long story short is that the communists who set fire to the Reichstag was then put on trial. Hitler passed new laws to retroactively roll back him being able to be put to death. And this was one of the things that public opinion was outraged about, because they saw the politicization of the political apparatus that then moved all the way forward to the final solution that carried out the Holocaust. And like this, and like to be clear, the Holocaust was a legal action. All citizens of Germany were stripped of citizenship before, so that these stateless people could then be killed and be beyond and outside of the law. So like no legal action happened.
The communists who set fire to the Reichstag was, by all accounts, a dimwit and a pawn. And actually, the SS were the ones who really did the work of setting the fire.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Should we strive? That's like a general question, because I'm hearing this. If someone were to tune in, not knowing what we're talking about, and we're saying, hey, I talked to a leftist the other day, the automatic assumption is, oh, this is some kind of far right wing podcast. Yeah. Are we perpetuating this false dichotomy, and it's preying on the human enterprise just by using terms like left and right? Because again, they can change meaning at any time. So it's like, we could, if this podcast were listened to 20 years from now, it might be the exact opposite, right? We say a leftist, maybe they're pro free speech and anti-war again. So I feel like it there's something about the language, where it really starts in the language, and people get duped into the moral camouflage of whatever position the left or right is wearing that is suitable to the state's agenda at that time.
I think
we're like transcend that language somehow. I don't know.
We're using it as a placeholder for authoritarian, totalitarian. And that's really what we're talking about, is people that are authoritarians and totalitarians.
And if we're talking about the right, are we talking about conservatism? Because to me, like, one of the important things is like, I identify as an anarchist. I identify more closely with a libertarian. Like, free use of drugs, free enterprise is like really, really important principles to me. Same thing, like, do whatever you want to your body. That's your right to your body. Respect my body too, and like core anarchist principles sort of stuff. And I think that confuses the shit out of most people, because I'm also like, yeah, guns are super awesome. And I think the family unit is a great thing that's used to create community. And you should like do drugs, and they're good if you're using them as a responsible adult.
I mean, I totally agree with the sentiment, Rob. I mean, for one, I mean, isn't it the case, like, especially in the early days of America, that what we, like Democrats were responsible for a lot of the stuff in the South, right? Like in the
Yeah, the
1800s.
KKK, those were Democrats.
Right,
Yes.
right. And now, like, if anyone sees like a Confederate flag today, they think of like a redneck Republican, from the bayou or something like that, right? So I think that's a good point. And also, I was going to say this for like 40 minutes ago when I started with the pendulum swing question. I mean, one, with the Oliver Anthony song, I mean, is that not evidence that the pendulum is kind of swinging? Because like it became massively viral and like, catchy song, great voice, but he obviously struck a chord, literally and figuratively, with what's going on. And I think that bodes well that, a lot of people are feeling like the actual issues that are important to their lives and that, are important to a functioning society are not being taken care of. And, in support for a song like that, I think is evidence of that. But my broader point is, we've had a conversation like this so many times before, right? Everything's fucked. You can't trust anyone. It's been going on for eons, whatever. I'm basically past it. I don't care, Eric, if you're right. Maybe we will end up in the gulag and we'll all be being tortured together and we'll have to make the best of it. But I'm seeing great, like, I'm seeing good in a lot of places, really hopeful shit everywhere. And, and to your point, Rob, like talking about that, maybe you don't even need to use those dividing qualifiers. If you're just talking about beauty and truth and, all the things that flow from it. But yeah, I mean, it's like, I think that's where things are going. I think that's the place we're at. And I do think that our attitude towards it, I mean, you so many things you act into existence in effect, right? Like all of our lives, if you think about it, like what you focus on and therefore what you respond to and therefore what you build on. And like, I do think it's probably the case that the more and this is a fine line, right? Because blissful ignorance isn't what you want either, but you want to be informed so that you can know what the direction of good is and just, pursue that and do the most to bring it about. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not.
It's both things. There's a Martin Luther King Jr. quote, which is the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends towards justice, which means you're going to live through a lot of fucked up shit before we get to the good place. You know what I mean? So it's both things simultaneously. Like there's always good and bad happening all at once.
On that Oliver Anthony thing, which is a fucking amazing performance. Like I got emotional listening to it, and I'm not even going through that shit, just through our talks really, and what we look at in Bitcoin. Obviously evidence of striking a chord with a lot of people, but again, if those people are operating within this false dichotomy of left right, doesn't that just cause them to double down?
Yep.
Like a guy on the right hears that, he's like, oh, see, it's those fucking Democrats, or the guy on the left is like, oh, it's the fucking Republicans, the reason we're all suffering and out of money. You've got AOC on these videos justifying why people shoplift, like, oh, they're getting squeezed, so shoplifting's okay. So it's I don't know, like, he's again speaking to the symptoms that are obvious, but if you're operating with the wrong framework, then it might just further drive divisiveness.
Absolutely. I thank you for bringing this up. This is really important to me because like Bitcoin is not a right left issue. It's an everybody versus nobody issue. And like, I think there's a lot to be found. I'm really happy to see more progressives coming into Bitcoin. I'm not so excited about their ideology following them. But like at the end of the day, the principle of free and open money is not a right-wing issue. It is an everyone issue. And this is one of the things that upsets me the most is that, yeah, like this right-left framing is so damaging across the board because at this point in time, people are so deep in their anonymity that they forget that like we actually share way more in common and have way more desire in that sharing than the disagreements can provide. And like, it's really important to get back to that. And that's one of the things RFK has been talking towards that I really like. And I really hope that the CIA does not kill him.
I think Ayn Rand and like G. Edward Griffin, they say it all boils down to individualism versus collectivism.
Mm.
And I think that's it, right? It's just like, fuck, are you going to respect individual life, liberty, and property or not? Like all the other isms, I guess, excluding libertarianism or Bitcoinism, right? We stand for the individual, but all these other isms are fucking group ideologies that are collective and they seek to prey on individual life, liberty, and property.
You could
Like
make
Eric, go ahead, John.
there you go.
No, I was gonna say, Eric, earlier you said that you don't like the term the network state. The term I've been using for myself, to Rob's point, is encryption powered individuals, which is not like the best term, but it kind of sums it up. And like I think we're seeing a rise. That's the sovereign individual thesis, right? Like we're seeing a rise in encryption powered individuals. And if you're going to have a healthy, happy, productive state or region in the future, you're going to have to respect encryption powered individuals. And I think like a state like El Salvador is an early example of what that is.
Yeah, I mean, when I listened to that song a bunch too, and it gave me goosebumps and all that. But I mean, isn't it just about fairness and justice, really, like we were talking about before? I mean, he's talking about not, the being surreptitiously stolen from, and tax dollars going where they shouldn't, and being being treated unfairly by people with more power and wealth than him. Like, isn't the whole thing more about just, and I know that, like, of course the modern left ideology is going to contort it in a way that's allows them to criticize it to the fullest, but like, isn't a song like that just about justice? So like, because one of my questions, I don't know if it was Rob or Eric who said it, it's like, even though it's great, it's divisive. It's like, but what do we say and do? Like, art is going to exist, and I think art plays a critical role in spreading ideas and inspiring people, and all this kind of stuff. So everything is going to be able to, and is going to be able to be twisted for whomever's purposes that's twisting it. But there's like, this is the same is true for memes, right? Like a good meme is just, it's a good meme because it's grounded in a profound truth, and it just does a great job of like showcasing it or framing it in a way that hasn't been done before, and that would cause it to be viral and people like it and stuff like that. And the same is true for art and music and all that kind of stuff. So like, we still need that, right? I mean, I still think that's a component of bringing people together, inspiring people, directing and orienting them in a productive, peaceful, liberating way. So, what's the play here in terms of, because everything's going to be twisted, right? Especially in as polarized times as we're in. But should you not orient your creation along the most pristine principles that you're capable of? And then, there's got to be some level of acceptance of what happens after that. But it understood as like a song about justice, I think it's way less divisive, maybe, and that would seem to be the case because everyone laughs at the fucking Rolling Stone and Wikipedia articles that are calling it a right-wing extreme song. People fucking liked it, and it went super viral and seen by bajillions of people. And it's only the people with an agenda, those media rags, that are trying to play it off as something that's like on the right-wing, left-wing spectrum.
I mean, the problem is that there are so many people that they just believe whatever the talking head on the TV tells them, and they parrot it and repeat it. And so despite the fact, if you use concerted thought to understand that it's not a right-wing talking point, when you just do the authoritarian plug, idiot box told me it's right-wing talking point, must be a right-wing talking point. And like, this is one of the great problems, is that like in the nihilism we exist within, and the propaganda is so powerful that like there isn't a general openness to having dialogue. And to me, like, this is one of the most terrifying things, is that without this openness, without there being a curiosity of saying, hey, this looks like a right-wing song and propaganda, is it? Well, no, like, let's talk about it. But most people aren't even available for that, because the idiot box is so powerful and it's propaganda and saying the other guy's evil. Don't even talk to him. And that's why we'll censor them.
But this is why I
think the most, this is the most powerful thing about RFK's candidacy, in my opinion, is like, I don't particularly agree with everything that RFK thinks and says, but RFK is extremely pro civil discourse, and civil discourse is just key to a functioning society. And he's really shifted the Overton window, I think, in a positive way, talking about positives, to, be like, why can't we talk about things? Why am I being censored by YouTube? Why is this happening? I'm a lifelong Democrat. Why are you censoring me? Why am I not allowed to talk? Right. That's an important message to get out there.
100%. And this is why I'm so excited and hopeful, because my gripes with the idiot box. I mean, I'm sure you've all seen the movie The Network, right? It's late 1970s movie about this
75, I think it came out.
This anchor, kind of goes crazy, and he goes on these crazy rants, on the nightly news. And it's all about that. It's all about the power of the TV and how it influences and, incentivizes or instills perception and fosters behaviors and stuff like that. And so it's been super shitty for the longest time. And now look at us, like 10,000 plus people will listen to this. Joe Rogan has, 50 times the viewership of primetime CNN. Tucker Carlson gets fired from Fox for being too close to an issue or being too off narrative or whatever. He goes right over to Twitter. He does his whatever, 10, 15, 30-minute shows now, sometimes long form interviews, and tens and tens of millions of people watch them. So like, this is just so incredibly encouraging that dynamic that you're describing, Eric, is actually like millions of people every day are opting out of that, because they're like, I'm only getting one perspective. I'm only getting, propaganda. I want more. Like I want to see more discourse around subjects. And I agree, Hodl, like I don't jive with everything that RFK says either, but RFK Jr. says either, but he's clearly like someone that's just like, calm down. Let's talk about it. Like, I know, I know you think I'm one thing, and I know I'm supposed to, we're on different sides here, but let's just talk about it. We're not going to get anywhere like canceling each other, yelling about it. Let's yelling about it. Let's have a chat about it. And, some mainstream hosts might not allow him to do that. But the point is, there's so much hunger for people there's so much hunger for that all these different platforms are massively important now, to the extent that I think this upcoming presidential election in the US, I mean, maybe the first election that is the primary media force in aggregate is alternative media, like podcasts and social media, for the first time, perhaps. Like, I don't think now this is just totally like N of one. This is just my opinion, but in prior cycles, obviously the main networks had the bulk of the persuasive force, let's say. And I think that's totally changed now, which is why you see so many of the candidates spending so much time on podcasts and social media and that kind of stuff.
Well, look at the candidates who are doing a good job, RFK and Vivek, as opposed to DeSantis, who's running like a comatose campaign from 2016, where he's like, hiding from the general public. He's running like a Basement Joe campaign where he's hiding from the general public and only coming out with release statements, pre-rehearsed statements. That's not what people want to see. People want to see a jacked RFK at Venice Beach lifting weights and being like, oh, let's talk about nuclear energy. That's what they want to see, because it feels there's something like very forward about it in a digital sense, and also something that feels very like yesteryear, like when politicians would come on the train to your town and shake hands and give a 4-hour speech and go to the bar with the local community.
It's back to social media, the benefits of social media being like the digital public square. People, absolutely, they can sense the authenticity there.
Absolutely, but like I don't want to rain on the parade, because I feel all of this. It's awesome. It's super great. The joke about the gulag is because I think we're the tip of the political spear. And when they figure out what we actually have and what we represent, and that they can't stop us, we're going to get thrown in there. So I think being in the gulag is actually going to be great, because it's a signature that we're having real success. But I mean, the other thing that alarms me is that so all this feels good. There's momentum. People want it. 50 years ago, they murdered this dude's dad because of the agitations that was possible. And before that, they murdered his uncle because he was going to go after the deep state. I as much as I desperately want it, it just seems foolish to believe that they won't openly kill him. And furthermore, that the deep state isn't so powerful that there's no way we'll get an alternative candidate. And to me, the frank truth is we're already at civil war, and just because it hasn't been declared and just because there isn't a resisting force doesn't mean it's not happening. And to me, it's very clear that the federal government at this point in time not only is illegal and imperialist, but represents a horrific overreach that absolutely destroys the moderation and ability of the republic to suspend any extension of its own powers, which is why, I mean, fuck, there's going to be people listening into this that have literally lived under a state of emergency in America their entire lives. And that thing has empowered the largest and the most powerful military apparatus on the planet. And so like, I have a really hard time grokking that they're going to be like, uh-oh, like a majority of the people like they want to like change how we do things. Uh-oh, guys, I guess it's time to give up. Like, that just seems a little foolish to me.
Sure, but I mean, it's always been that way. I know the technology allows for the totalizing control to be a bit different now, but it's always been like kind of like that. And so there's two things, right? One, I to agree with you, I don't think anything changes until the state atrophies as a result of not being able to fund itself, which ultimately happens through Bitcoin. Like that, all the other stuff are like nice to haves. But a nice to have is still something to add to your plate, right? And like, I think even if whatever happens to RFK, you know, God willing, he survives and lives a very long life. But it's more about the fact that his messaging and Vivek's, and to some degree DeSantis's, although he's not doing the greatest job of getting it out there, is resonating with people. It just means that like these ideas and these principles, like at a minimum, are more top of mind, are more important, are more orienting to people than perhaps they have been in the past. And I get that, like, whoever they are, the power structures that be, aren't just going to roll over because of that. But it does mean all those people are more primed to take actions to foster more freedom in their lives, to seek more truth in their lives, to find more solutions in their lives. You know, so again, on that long arc of history, because we shouldn't be expecting, any sort of full and total victory to utopia. And, in any case, it really seems like the arc is bending a little bit stronger these days to me. And my last point is, like, doesn't it matter how we think about that? Like, doesn't it matter that we think things are getting better and they're hopeful, and we lean into the things that we deem good, the principles and the values and the creations and all that kind of stuff? Like, I think that's very important, because the more people that take that responsibility upon themselves, rather than just saying, look how totalizing it is, we're totally fucked, it just means they're going to be doing that little bit more in their daily life to bring that about. And that's how things get brought about. Like we've been talking about World War II or Hitler's Germany and stuff, and the simplistic historical, assessment is like, wow, Hitler's the devil. He came up, convinced everyone with his hocus pocus magic, and tried to take over the world. But these are slow incremental processes where Hitler comes up in the 30s and he starts saying some things that are a little out of bounds that people aren't used to, but they're striking a bit of a chord, and they say, yeah, more. He gets that positive reinforcing feedback and he goes, oh, okay, I'll say more of my shtick, and they give him more feedback. And it's this like play between the zeitgeist that people are holding in their minds, the things that they're feeding, and an avatar to kind of execute that spirit effectively. And taken to its zenith, that's what you get. But that's my point, is that's why it's important to always be expecting, striving, and working toward the things that you think are the most good. Because if everyone did that, I think that's another means of atrophying or starving the they somewhere. There's the financial means, but there's also that means, the attention starving, all the different ways that we can starve a thing. It's not just financial. That might be the strongest one, and I think we starve it by focusing on what's good and what's beautiful and what's truthful and what's liberating. And if we all did that, I think we'd be much farther ahead. And that's I think that's the way to go. I
mean, you talking about that makes me think of one other aspect here that I think is kind of important, and like, I think it's dangerous to frame it in this way, but essentially, like, it's the geriatric class. Like, these people are beyond like, they're so integrated in the matrix, you can't unplug them at this point. And it reminds me of how Morpheus talks about, like, during Neo's freak out, he's like, yeah, like, maybe we shouldn't have unplugged you, because like, we don't do it with people that are as old as you. I mean, he was like a pretty young dude in that. And I think that's really important, because like, I find myself, like, a great idea is talking with people about the COVID stuff and vaccines. Like, RFK has clearly surfaced a lot of really important stuff. Most older people that feel the way that they feel whenever I bring this stuff up. It is a constant circle and there's no way to get through it because they're so embedded in it. And I bring it up because like I have to wonder if, you know, maybe this problem just naturally dies off literally. And because us as the new generation in power have raised our children with this new perspective, perhaps things really do change in a meaningful and powerful way. And to be clear, I'm super hopeful and I'm really, really excited about the direction we're going because of having Bitcoin. And as we watch this thing accelerate, I do think we're going to watch something frankly eschatological and watch the dissolving of the state in a new political form. And what's most important than that is like, it's going to rescue us in terms of our souls. You know, like there's a meaning crisis. And I think more than even the economic freedom that we experience through Bitcoin, the deep and soulful purpose that speaks to us and our meaning in the world means so much more. And I think when people see that and why people watch podcasts like this is they're so hungry for the resolution to the meaning crisis. And we actually have the solution, even though it seems so insane that magic internet money fixes this, which I get and I really want to honor. But if you can get past that and really do the work, it's pretty extraordinary to see how serendipitous this solution is, which is one of the reasons why I do think it is truly messianic, that it was produced at this time in this way right now, and it's the only thing that can save us.
Just to dovetail on that, the geriatric class, I think it was Pascal. I could be wrong about attribution, but he said science advances from funeral to funeral.
Yeah.
So you need the old ossified programmed people to die off literally for new ideas and new memes to flourish. And the other beautiful thing about Bitcoin is that it draws in oppressed and oppressor alike, right? So victims of hyperinflation are going to move towards Bitcoin, just like the billionaire class or elite class will move towards Bitcoin when the guillotines come out. So it is this serendipitous, interesting solution that sort of attacks the cultural or meaning crisis from top and bottom simultaneously.
I had never considered like the same apparatus when the state is hijacked to threaten the billionaire with the guillotine is like the same apparatus that like puts millions in the camps, and like Bitcoin solves their exact same problem in the exact same way, allowing both of them to flee from the threat of their lives. That's pretty funny.
Well, Bitcoin, I mean, it's just another example of Bitcoin kind of resolving opposites, right?
Yes, exactly.
It's almost like Bitcoin fixes this.
It's almost like Bitcoin's a platypus.
I want to say something about the Oliver Anthony song again. So I don't know if you guys know this song. It's called "You Never Even Called Me by My Name" by David Allan Coe. It's a classic country western song, really good. And in the last verse of the song, David Allan Coe says, "You know, the songwriter sent this to me, and he said, I think I've written the perfect country western song." And then David Allan Coe, the singer, wrote back to the songwriter, and he said, "You know what? It could have been the perfect country western song, but you didn't say anything about getting drunk. You didn't say anything about a pickup truck. You didn't say anything about mom, and you didn't say anything about a train." And so the songwriter sends him back a new last verse to the song. And he says something like, you know, "I was drunk the day my mom got out of prison." And like something like, "Before I could get there to pick her up, she got ran over by a damned old train." And I think I'm a terrible singer, but it's a really good song.
It was good. I like it.
Oliver Anthony's song could have been the perfect song for the modern zeitgeist, but he needed to say something about fiat currency, central banking, statism, and Bitcoin. Like he hit all the symptoms, but he didn't go to the root.
But
And so
I mean,
that's where we're at, right? Like it's like people are feeling the pain, but they're misattributing the cause.
I hear you. I mean, he did say dollar ain't shit and he made illusions, right? But would it have been as viral if it, let's say it mentioned Bitcoin and everyone was like, it's just another Bitcoin meme song,
maybe
you
not.
know?
Well, that's like what the fuck happened in 1971. That website is a Bitcoin website produced by Bitcoiners. It's the best Bitcoin meme in existence.
Right.
It doesn't mention Bitcoin once during it. And people who go to it and reference it, they have no idea what the fuck they're propagating, but they're propagating Bitcoin memes.
It's the same reason I named my podcast Money. You know, I didn't want to say anything about Bitcoin. You got to have the hook.
Well, that's kind of
why we're. Go ahead, John.
I was just gonna say that's kind of what I mean by, you know, the hopeful, positive bent. It's like if Bitcoin is what we think it is, if it's as empowering as we think it is on so many different levels, then if you just use it to empower you, your perception, your life, your future, your family, all that kind of stuff, people are going to naturally want to know what the fuck it is at the core of like how you're able to pull all that off. Yeah. And at some point, they're going to uncover that Bitcoin has been fairly central to that. And that's how people persuade and sell themselves, you know, because we've all been down the road of trying to persuade and pitch and orange pill people. And, you know, maybe sometimes it's worked, but largely you just seem like a crazy person. People
it doesn't work at all. It doesn't work.
They're not ready to be unplugged.
Yeah. You have to become someone worthy of imitation.
Lately.
You have to what?
I think you have to become someone worthy of imitation.
Right.
You have to be someone in your family or circles that people want to be.
And a part of that is not being a negative Nelly all the time. It's actually thinking, you know, the world is great. It's getting better. There's so many fucking awesome things happening about it. And you lean in wherever it feels most natural. Right. But that's what people want to mimic. You know, nobody wants to mimic the, you know, the end is nigh guy.
This is talking about going back to the Matrix. My wife, I was talking to my wife the other day about Bitcoiners, and she was saying, you know, you guys are like, you're like Amish people who live exclusively on the internet. Nobody wants to join you, you know? Like your prescriptions for people are like, you know, sun your balls and eat meat and live in a shack, right? I mean, it's kind of like when Morpheus comes to Neo in the Matrix, and he's like, Neo, listen, I know you have this perfect life. You're like a mid-level software engineer. You sleep on a comfortable bed every night. Fuck that. Unplug. Come to the real world where your muscles don't work and you have to eat gruel, and also you work on my ship all the time. Like, but it's real, man. It's real. Like, that's a terrible pitch. And that's what we do as Bitcoiners all the time.
And there's that specific scene where like he like flips the fuck out after they put him in the first time. Yeah. And he's just like, put me back. Bill, like, no, like it can't be this. And he's just like, yeah, it's true. And what's really interesting us using the Matrix analogy is that a term from the Matrix has actually made its way into larger philosophical discourse, and that is the term the desert of the real. Yeah. And that's sort of this freak out point, is when you actually understand that what reality is, it's this desert that has captured everybody. And that's why there's so much unoriginality. And that's why when somebody like Oliver Anthony presents a song that strikes the chord that hits that zeitgeist, why it speaks so deeply and reverberates in us, because it sees something outside of this desert of the real, true possibility. And that's what people are so fucking hungry for, because of the meaning crisis and how deep that nihilism has captured people, and why there's also such a strong reactionary against it. Like this is one of the strangest things I've found, is that the envy people can feel towards that freedom that you get to experience vis-a-vis Bitcoin and the way it has transformed you. It angers them, because they can't see that same possibility, and they think now like you're just another one of those fucking scammers. And it's really intriguing to see that, because I think the most important aspect of what's going on is breaking through that barrier of that nihilism and say, no, there is another possibility outside and beyond the state, and we can do this through this new political form that cryptography seems to empower, vis-a-vis the kind of sovereignty it has and the refusal and the proof that cryptography offers.
By the way, just on a simple practical standpoint, there's 26,000 shitcoins out there now, right? And there's only one Bitcoin. And so if we're acting like every other shitcoin community and pitching our coin, it just comes off cringe and desperate, and it doesn't differentiate us at all. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I assume that you are as assured of what's happening here as I am. And so, yeah, I'm past the point of needing to tell people. But I felt for a long time, I felt like it was my responsibility to tell people about it. And I have a friend who said, hey, listen, man, if I ever talk to you about Bitcoin, that was my way of saying I love you. And I really felt like that for a long time. And I felt like I had survivor's guilt, and I wanted as many people to come along for the ride as I possibly could. And then I realized that it was counterproductive. And once I realized it was counterproductive, I was like, all right, it's time to just know this in my heart to be true and just operate as a Bitcoin maximalist in daily life. And that orange pill is way more people, like you were saying, John.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it also, I think it's a greater not burden, but it's like it's a more difficult task in a sense, because like it's easy just to to say all this stuff, like, look how bad that is, and look how fucked up this is, and look how that is. But again, in terms of like people mimicking, the success, wanting to mimic people so they can experience something similar, success or whatever else, it's like that's not what they're looking for. They're not looking to be a wise guy who knows about macroeconomics and politics and all that kind of stuff. They're looking for someone who has a life that seems successful and enjoyable and meaningful. And you're not, someone who's just always talking about these things explicitly. One, they're not being that type of person, but two, are we not, when we do it, taking the easy road, because it's way easier to, talk about it and point the finger than it is to like live it moment to moment in your life. That's the lower time preference approach, right? To just be like, look, I accept, the things I cannot change, and whatever the rest of that quote is. Actually, what is the rest of that quote? I accept the things I cannot change.
The serenity prayer. The serenity.
Yeah. And the wisdom to know the difference. I can't remember the middle
Change
part.
the things I can and accept the things I cannot.
Right.
And the wisdom to know the difference.
Exactly. And yeah, I just think that's a better approach all around, not because only of its success, but it's like the added bonus of you actually put the emphasis back on your own action and your own, refining your own character and all that kind of stuff. And like, that's actually the thing that everyone must do if we're ever going to get to this place that we often talk about in the future, where, it's a better place.
It's another way of saying accept Bitcoin too, right? Because you cannot change Bitcoin. So accept Bitcoin.
As your Lord and Savior? Or
no, as your form of payment.
As your guiding ideology, right? Again, individualism versus collectivism. It's Bitcoinism versus everything else.
I mean, this is a funny etymological thing that seems to be going on that I've noticed so much. There's all of these funny linguistic collisions that happen, particularly in information theory, like security. It's really interesting to see that. And I think it goes to show like the actual deep linguistic problem that's occurring that like Bitcoin solves, because we spend all this time talking about truth. And I think I've talked with you a little bit about this, Rob, that like Bitcoin is fundamentally like a super language project in order to speak about economic events that like we can speak with a totality of truth vis-a-vis a cryptographic proof. And now like we don't have to worry about this fraud and criminality problem that seems to pervade language itself and its incapacity to fully convey and actualize itself. And to be clear, like humans used to have that. And that's like when language, law, and religion used to like be a single thing, and you could like take an oath to your God. Like the oath had nothing to do with the semantic context. It had to do with the actualization of what was said. And so like people used to get that through religion, because like I'd be like, if I'm a good Christian, I got to kill Rob to like actualize him breaking his oath. But with the development of the nation state, like that thing was destroyed. And now we have this apparatus called law that can't actualize justice because it can't do the same thing.
Which is probably why Bitcoin's so fucking hard to describe, right? It's a super language object. Can't get language to wrap around it properly.
Yeah. Well, and everything's self-referential, trying to get back to conveying this thing, which is, frankly, like this is why the idea of truth and being is so important in this, is because like the only way that we find that grounding is also understanding the historical concourse that cryptography was developed. It wasn't like they were like, hey, like math is like a fun puzzle and we can like encrypt stuff. No, it was like, we're going to fucking die if they figure out what we're doing here. So like we better be secure in how we're going to do this.
We've talked about the Matrix a lot today. And I think one thing a lot of people don't know is that the entire Matrix trilogy is an allegory for Plato's cave. And when you read Plato's work, like Socrates is the central figure. Socrates says a lot of things, but the culmination of his philosophy, right? That he died for his philosophy. He actualized it through fulfilling that oath, if you will. That was the only way. Like he had to actually live and die the philosophy to actualize it. So it's something beyond, and it gets down to the essentials of human action, right? It's praxeological. It's not something you can even speak about necessarily. And so Bitcoin, I don't know, it's somehow taken that to the next level, maybe just kind of forcing individualism on people in a way, which is somewhat paradoxical too, because like it's all about freedom, but it's kind of forcing freedom and responsibility on people in the long run.
By the way, there's also that fourth matrix, but we don't talk about that one.
We don't talk about that. I haven't seen it. Don't think I will.
You haven't seen it?
No.
It was sad.
It's terrible. Don't watch it. On the Bitcoin language thing, I think that, one thing I've said numerous times is that Bitcoin is your money is an OS for the human mind, similar to the way that language is an OS for the human mind. I mean, I watch my children, and if my 3-year-old needs to unlock something in her world, she has to learn new words to unlock new things and new experiences. And when we go to the store, she learns that everything has, a price tag. And in order to take that toy home with us, that it costs a certain amount of money. And she learns to think in money the same way we learn to think in words, right? And so, Bitcoin is a OS upgrade that is allowing those of us who've upgraded early to vastly outcompete people with the outdated OS, basically.
It's a great way to look at it. I always say that language is a medium of exchange for human conception, right? We take our perceptions, turn them into ideas, and communicate through language as turning them into conceptions, basically. And then money is like a medium of exchange of human action, right? The actual consequences of human action over time, and then the amount of life energy it takes to buy something, and et cetera, et cetera. So they're both fundamental to the human operating system.
Yeah.
Well, and before this, we had this constant problem of, because of language and how it was structured and the promises that could be made and then broken, the money was always fundamentally broken. And that's why it fused back into law, was to try to actualize the meaning of it, but then it corrupted itself through the same mechanism and apparatus. And now we're at this place where language itself is so fundamentally broken that we can't trust institutions, we can't trust people, we can't trust religion, we can't trust anything on a whole, which leads to a totalizing nihilism of why there's no truth, there's no meaning, there's no justice. What's even the point of any of this?
Right.
And it turns out when we can actually follow truth through a deep process of proof of work, we can exhume this new grounding that we can now utilize to reorient the entirety of our being, which also opens us up to the possibility to again, I'll emphasize what's so important to me about Bitcoin isn't the economic aspect. It's the fact that it renews this idea of us rescuing ourselves from the terms and being able to actualize a new future, and for me, this isn't about me or my kids or even my grandkids. This is about posterity centuries from now, and reserving a space for them, saying, we respect you enough that we're not going to inflate and destroy the entire economy for our own selfish, greedy, and petty ideals of what's good today, because we took on the authoritarianism of the state and the fundamental emergency that it insists upon for why we need to give hundreds of billions of dollars to people that have nothing to do with us in places that most people can't identify on a map. And meanwhile, while we have huge natural disasters like in Hawaii, we literally insult people by saying, here, you can have $700. I'll probably get you 2 gallons of milk at the end of this.
And it's not a natural disaster.
Yes, that's the other one that's coming up more
a step
and more.
further there. It's we needed a way to.
What do you mean?
It's
People have a theory
look into it. Look into it. It's not natural.
It's the conspiracy theory is that there's a Oprah-induced energy weapon. But there's a lot of stuff that's fishy about what's happening in Hawaii. Right? Put it like that.
Having been through a number of these disasters, I totally think it's just a natural disaster and that conditions were perfect. But I want to say I offer very deep empathy towards the conspiracy theory perspective, which may be proven to be real, because of how little trust there is and how much there are actual operations conducted in the United States against citizens from the military, and no one will be held responsible.
Eric, I would challenge you to look into that more. I'm in Hawaii right now.
Okay.
Word on the ground is some really weird shit. I don't have enough to go into it, but it's weird.
Well, and I really appreciate that, because I will look into it more, and I trust you. And what I think is really interesting is that this is one of the main techniques that the apparatus uses now to try to make people not think at all, is by labeling it a conspiracy theory.
Of course.
Yeah.
And it does. If you're a normie, it seems like a conspiracy theory. Why would the U.S. military do that? Why would they want disaster? Yeah. And again, it turns out when you try to follow the logic, you end up following the money, and maybe people want to buy up pieces of Hawaii.
If you've been to that, area, Kaanapali is down the road from Lahaina, and Kaanapali is extremely corporate, and Lahaina is much more mom and pop, right?
Old town.
Right. And so you can see where the business interest would want to turn Lahaina into resort town, just like Kaanapali down the road is, so that they could control all the commerce, all the important commerce on the island, because those are important commercial centers for Maui.
I think also, I mean, again, just like 9/11 had some physics problems with it, this particular event has some physics problems with it and being natural. And again, do your own research, whatever. What do I know? But doesn't appear to be natural. And I just wanted to say something about Bitcoin too. Like, John, you hit a lot upon religion and its importance is like giving us these ethical principles historically in the analog age, when all we had were scribbles on a piece of paper and promises and trust that people would keep their promises, things like that. We never had a way to integrate those ethical systems into an actual financial incentive. And it seems like that's something really fundamental. Like, you needed not only the framework and the guidance for people to act properly, but then the push, right? There needs to be the push. And I don't think I can scrape my mind. I don't think anything's ever done anything like that at all other than Bitcoin.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's such a mind bender, which I'm sure we've all kind of come to our own realization of, but somehow Bitcoin is like this smashing together of those same kind of eternal, most fruitfully orienting values and principles that have been capitulated, throughout history in many different places, and the most powerful incentive in the human social or intersubjective realm, which is money. And when you put those two things together, as you say, Rob, like it travels a lot more, a lot farther, and a lot more powerfully. And, if there's any truth to that at all, and if you just look at the power of that incentive and the power of those orienting principles, let's say, and how the influence they've had throughout history when they've been, faithfully adhered to in one way or another. I mean, that's why we get so excited about the potential of Bitcoin, right? Because like, not only is it hard to even comprehend what that is, those two things coming together in that way and how it does so, but just the implications of it are like, wild.
Well, what's even more mind-blowing is I'd critique it. It's not money, like you said, but it's energy. And somehow Satoshi like figured out how to bake that component in, getting back to the true root of economic output and its direct relationship to energetical output, like in kilojoules. And like, that's the thing that blows my mind, is somehow like his art of the presentation of Bitcoin pulled all of these things together so perfectly, and in such a short window too. Like, we literally, between today, we can say it's impossible to make Bitcoin because their surveillance apparatus is so powerful.
You're back.
I always fuck that up.
We lost your last point.
Yeah, I know. This is the price for living in the woods. But the fact that Satoshi made this by gathering all this together so perfectly in a short 10-year window, where the possibility of that was only available. I don't know. Like, when I look at that stuff, this is what really blows my mind and pushes me into a more spiritual realm. Is how is it possible in the concourse of humanity that we get this piece of technology that seems to be able to liberate all of humanity from the clutches and evilness of statism, particularly in the belly of the beast in the darkness, and it does it in this fucking miraculous way? Just like Virgil being like, oh yeah, like there's just a trap door we can get out from the bottom of hell here. Check it out. It's like, whoa, holy shit.
Yeah. I want to go back to the Maui thing for a second, not, because I know no one's sufficiently informed perhaps to talk about it, but it is another example of how there's just no trust anywhere, right? Like, everything, for a lot of people, everything is a psyop until proven otherwise, or everything is like not what it seems until proven otherwise. And for good reason, right? I mean, if you do your homework and you go back through all the, the big major events, at a minimum, there's a lot of sketchy details. At worst, they're, through the course of time, they're proven to be instigated by the very people that were claimed to be victims at the time, right? Gulf of Tonkin comes to mind. 9/11 definitely had a lot of weird stuff going on. It's like, and pick one, right? Even Pearl Harbor. I mean, you dig into the weeds on that, and again, that's the official story. Again, at a minimum, appears to be way, way, way off. JFK is another one. And so there's this attitude of complete lack of trust. Now, I think on the one hand, that does feed into the nihilism, But as we've been kind of elucidating throughout this conversation, like when the nihilism is all encompassing, I mean, it's destructive and you get those destructive behaviors. I think the Bitcoin crowd is representative of being invigorated and infused with that meaning that we've been discussing and all the different considerations that then flow from that. But still, there's this predicament where you can't really, anything outside your immediate experience or by people that you like, know firsthand and trust tremendously, you don't know what to think about them, like you just, so, and I think Bitcoin over the course of time, the institutions that emerge around and on top of Bitcoin, whatever form they may take, I think they will be imbued with a greater ability to trust them ultimately, and it may take a long time. But I mean, how does a society or an individual contend with the notion that it's another Matrix reference, right? Like where Cypher sees everything as like, hot chick or this or that when he's seeing the character scroll down the screen. When I watch the news, I'm just like, PSYOP, don't trust him. He's lied before. He was caught with fraud. They've been arrested, all this kind of stuff. And so what is it to live in a world like that? And I mean, I think part of the response probably for all of us, but definitely for me, is like, well, focus on the value in your immediate surroundings. What can you do? The people that kind of stuff. And it kind of sucks, right? Because you don't want to be apathetic about what's happening in the world. But how could you even get to the truth? I mean, we're however many years on from JFK. Those documents still aren't released. It's still, no one's admitted any fault. The official narrative is still the one that, is still the official narrative. Same is true with 9/11, all this kind of stuff. So how do you contend with a world where your information is so distorted and deceitful?
The way I do it personally is I take every single thing on a case-by-case basis. And if I'm interested in it, and I'm interested in a lot of things, I look into it and then I come to a conclusion. So I don't put everything in the bucket of PSYOP, and I don't put everything in the bucket of conspiracy, and I don't put everything in the bucket of true fact. I take everything on an individual basis, and then I try and have some level of metacognition, which just means thinking about my own thinking about what's possibly, and thinking about the person's thinking who's putting together the article, and thinking about why I'm being presented this information at this specific time, and then is the information correct? And it's a really hard thing to do, and like you have to go through quite a framework in your own mind from first principles on every single topic that you come across, and thinking is incredibly hard work. But guess what? I mean, how else are you going to make sense of the world? That's the only way to do it. You have to take everything on an individual case-by-case basis and work through the details. If you want to have any sort of, facsimile, like even come close to understanding what's actually happening in reality.
I think you're absolutely correct. But that proof of work that's necessary to go through the critical thinking and the metacognition necessarily narrows the scope of things you can take under consideration.
Yes.
So you have to know like where to point it. And then if you want to go outside of that scope, you're back in the same situation. You've got to trust people, right? You got to filter by, I don't know, ethics, principles, values, these things, intuition even, right? And trusting people. So there's this is kind of the nature of economics, right? We each have our area of expertise or specialization, and then we have to be interdependent outside of that scope.
Do you think
go ahead.
Selectively interdependent?
You see, but like you guys are all engaging in thought process, including being like, oh, like I don't have.
Damn it.
Area. Oh god damn it! Like every fucking time, huh? Like, so we have to find like what's happening is it's a proof of stake versus proof of work again. Like you shortcut all of this by going to an authoritarian saying, well, they know better than me, so I'll just plug that in. And when you do a thought process, you have to go, okay, maybe they are right. There's this other person that says it, and like now you're doing all this work, and yeah, it's fucking hard, including the fact that like we live inside of this panopticon that's constantly flashing shit at us that makes us not want to have any attention span whatsoever, and so it becomes really hard to engage in true thought process. But like what I've found, because a new place that I'm at, I don't have internet and I have to read, and the first 5 minutes of reading, like it's fucking tough. I really have to encourage myself to do it. But once I get 5 minutes past, I'm like, wow, like this is satisfying. I'm having new ways of looking at the world and thinking. This is elucidating new points and principles I would have never considered before. This is really great. but you have to push past that layer that resists you. And I think most people are so stuck in that layer, and they've let it calcify so deeply that they can't actually think.
And they're getting their time stolen from them. So they don't have time. They don't have the 5 minutes to overcome the static friction to get to that process of creative discovery.
There's also a
time to
problem where
think about this.
Yeah, there's also a problem where the investigative, media apparatus is counterfeit, right? It used to be real. It really was.
Right.
And then it got swapped out for this new fake thing, which is, opinion masquerading as news, essentially, because, the economic model, the regional monopoly that each paper used to employ is dead. I mean, there used to be reporters on the ground who were fighting for stories, and they were blue collar guys. And now every reporter is a chick with pink hair who went to Princeton, whose parents are worth $600 million. And you're like, wait, what the fuck do you know about anything? And so now the reporters go to work to, they're the mouthpiece of the powerful. The guys I knew who worked in newsrooms, they were blue collar guys. Their fathers had worked in factories. They felt like their fathers had been fucked over, and they wanted to stick it to powerful people. They wanted to find out what was going on. And yeah, maybe you weren't necessarily getting the correct information about the government, because the government has always been involved in the dissemination of the news, but you were getting pretty good information about almost everything else. And now you're not. And that's a big thing that shifted.
Do you think fiat also artificially expands what's relevant to you? Like, so for example, like, okay, a horrible war breaks out between Russia and Ukraine. I don't know what the fuck is going on there. It's such a complex issue, right? All sorts of different agendas at play. And in a different world, perhaps I would, again, I would hate that people are dying, but I'd be like, it's not relevant enough to me to take up much of my scarce time. But because of the mechanism of fiat, the hundreds of billions of dollars that are being funneled in the cause of that, predicated on a particular framing or view of it, makes it relevant to me, or at least more relevant than it otherwise would be, because now I'm funding it in some capacity. It's taking, resources, capital, time, whatever, away from me. And so by virtue of like the tentacles of fiat, of time theft, of redistribution of wealth, spreading everything around so much, maybe it spreads relevance too. And in a different world, maybe in a Bitcoin future, we would be way, way more locally focused, and, for a number of different reasons, but that being one of them.
I think it's doubly bad, because not only is it imputing costs to you, right? Like every $100 billion that goes to Ukraine is coming out of dollar saver purchasing power, but that stolen purchasing power is also being used to amplify the counterfeit media narrative, right? You're going to see it more and more and more fucking I stand with Ukraine memes or whatever fucking TikTok dances they're pushing. So it's like, not only are you being stolen from, so you feel the cost and you bear the brunt of it, but it's also getting pushed onto your attention span more and more.
Let's also heap some responsibility on ourselves. Like Eric said, like it takes him 5 minutes of solid resistance to read a fucking book. We are all so addicted to this media apparatus and this recreational outrage and knowing about some crazy thing that's happening, far away, none of which matters. And so few of us are engaged and involved in our local communities where we can actually have a, decent sphere of influence and affect things in real life. So like, that's on us. Like, yeah, there are bad people on the other end pushing, garbage down our throats, but we're saying this garbage is yummy. I would like some more, please. Right.
Yeah. Well, we're touching on the point of why Bitcoin is a responsibility. Like it is truly taking responsibility to acknowledge and understand that, like, yes, I'm not isolated from the war in Ukraine, and that my tax dollars go to that. And to me, like, this is the biggest ethical point that I propound, is that, like, I want nothing to do with war. I am a historian and a scholar of the 20th century genocides. And I have seen in every single fucking decade of the 20th century, they use this apparatus to conduct death and horror on a scale that is unconsequential in all of human history, and is absolutely horrifying that most people can't think through their relationship to that. And I want to empathize. It's very, very scary, and it's very, very difficult, but we must take that responsibility onto us. And to me, the greatest crisis is that if we leave this for our children, like, there isn't a hope anymore. And I can't help but think of the way that fiat manifests itself topologically in the world, it eliminates the possibility of certain futures where fiat doesn't exist. So like we can't, you know, there's no point in planning a permaculture forest that has a sustainability on a lifespan of 300 years. What's the fucking point? Well, the point is people need to eat for all of known humanity, but there's no financial incentive to set something up like that. And think about that. In the entire economy, the greatest long-term loan that exists is a 40-year jumbo. It is impossible to financialize anything outside of a 40-year window.
So this is something that we should just start doing, right? Like, why can't we just start doing this? We can use time locks and Bitcoin to financialize things that are potentially 1,000 years in the future.
Well, and to me, like,
do it now, right?
This is where this shit is going to get really off the hook, is when people start having really long-term thinking and start building towards that. Because this is what makes Bitcoin so powerful on the long term, is that through having that lower time preference, it allows for a greater fidelity economically to be understood in the world.
Yeah.
And so that true economic activity is carried out, as opposed to just the financialization vis-a-vis fiat.
When I was younger, like college age, I used to spend a lot of time thinking about how I really wished that there was some type of organization I could join that was, long-term planners that thought extremely long-term. I'm talking, multi generation. And, there are a couple organizations that are like that, most of which are not doing anything that I find very appealing, right? And I think that we have a real shot as Bitcoiners to be that organization that thinks 300 years in the future. And that's exciting. Like that gives me, when I hear that out loud, it just gives me a lot of hope and optimism for my lifetime, even though I'm not going to be around to see, the building of the cathedral. I won't be around to see the final brick get laid. It doesn't matter though, because I'm happy to engage in something that is going to be, happening long after I'm gone.
Yeah, that's, first of all, it's a weird thing to think when you're in college. But
I've always been a weird guy, John.
I'm kind of jealous of it because it's a cool.
You were a
cool
Bitcoiner
thought.
before Bitcoin.
Maybe you weren't doing DMT as much as I was in college, were you?
I don't know about that.
I mean, how many of us were normies,
maybe.
Yeah.
But no, I think it's an awesome sentiment, and I agree. And it's also, I think it orients you properly insofar as, it's both, it's humbling, right? And it's also a result of humility to say that, like, you're going to strive to generate or contribute to value at some point in the future, whether it's eternal or not, but several hundred years outlast you. And that seems to me to be actually the most productive way to orient oneself. Like, because I think if you don't do things like that, your own self ends up becoming, your God, like the paramount thing that you're trying to aggrandize and imbue with value. And whether it's religion or whether it's these long-term projects, I think that's part of the benefit that's felt by the individual that's contributing to them, but who will never experience them, is that it orients them properly for a fruitful and meaningful life, even beyond that particular project, because it tunes their thinking that way.
Well, and also it's like we all in some sense have this like sacred and solemn duty. If you are one of the people that were around at this point in time and you could pick up a whole Bitcoin, 100 million sats for $30,000, and then you can lock that and, transfer it to the future, the compounding of value by the time it finally gets where it's going and does what it's meant to do is quite a sacred gift that you have bestowed upon the generations that have come after you. And I think all of us have some sort of a duty to push a lot of our wealth into the future. And that's sort of it's like a Satoshian principle. Satoshi invents Bitcoin. He has 1 million coins. He's vastly wealthy, but he never touches them. Mm-hmm. And so in order to be like Satoshi, you also have to take some meaningful or significant portion of your stack and push it into the future for the rest of humanity, like without touching it. Like that. And that's the hardest thing ever, like hodling a vast amount of wealth without, blowing it on your own meaningless existence, but using it for something great. It beautifies you and purifies you in the way that, like, your life now has meaning. Whereas if you spend it on coke and hookers, it has no meaning.
This parallels a lot our discussion with Sailor too, talking about taking your keys to the grave, right? The permanent time lock.
Well, and I'd also convey that, like, The sense that the sovereign is supposed to provide is a sense of safety and security that actualizes the law. And in the world that we live in, that capacity of the Commonwealth can't actualize itself in a meaningful way, but with Bitcoin it can. And one of the things I find the most interesting is the true sense of deep security that comes from having Bitcoin, and that no one can take that from you unless they acquire the private key. It allows for you to move away from like the schizophrenia and paranoia of fiat rich, because like it's all going to evaporate. You have to flip out. You have to play the game. You have to invest in property. You have to have stocks. You have to have a 401k. You have to do the obfuscation of all of your taxes and cheat on. And like it just becomes this vast crime that's based on the schizophrenia of not being able to know or understand what the future is, because your money's fundamentally fucking broken. There's no possible way to remain connected to a wealth that's going to extend itself 300 years into the future.
By the way, we as Bitcoiners, anytime we're feeling that way ourselves, it's because we're focused too much on the fiat price, because Bitcoin didn't change. It's just like our preconditioning has us focused in the wrong area.
That's another point that Saylor brought up, right? Because we're talking about other rich people. And he was saying, like, if your wealth is locked up in one of those anxiety-inducing assets, so let's say it's Manhattan real estate, then you are dragged into the political dimension of your wealth. Because obviously, being that it's physical and it's in a place, a polity with people and policies, if you want to maximally protect it, you need to be in that sphere. And then again, it's just that this conspiracy of incentives where it's like, well, you know, you become the uber rich guy and you have the primary assets in a particular place. Well, of course, I'm going to buy the fucking politicians. I don't want them to pass a 10% property tax. So yes, I'm going to have all the politicians in my pocket. So I pay one or none, and I'm going to create other architectures of policy that I can, you know, skip out on it elsewhere. And this elaborate, matrix of corruption and coercion and bribing and all this kind of stuff emerges just from the imperfection of the asset. Basically, you know, you want the asset to perform a particular thing, which is moving value through, in this case, let's say time, but it's not designed, it's not engineered to do that. And you have to make up for its faults with other actions in other domains. And those are corrupting actions. You know, the imperfections in the substance creates the corruption in the substance, creates the corruption in the individual, creates the corruption in the society, creates the corruption in culture. And so again, what happens when we have an incorruptible substance?
Yeah. It corrupts the corruption. It returns us.
Corrupts the corruption. That's cool.
But Rob, I know you got to go in like 2 or 3 minutes.
No. I've got another hour. Sorry.
Oh, cool.
I gave you a lot of heads up.
You know how we wrap up here. So,
well, I was just going to say, you know, to that point, since Saylor mentioned it, you know, about taking his keys to the grave, I've thought about it more, and I know it's a wild notion because I think a lot of us probably held this idea of like passing it on to our family and stuff. But it makes it makes a hell of a lot of sense to me, because, you know, his point was that, you know, you and everyone, I'm sure we've thought about this too. Sure, you die and you leave your Bitcoin, even if you have some complex architecture and time locks, like it's going to wind up in someone's hands and it's going to be their choice what to do with it. And maybe they haven't developed the character or whatever to do good things with it, you know? So maybe it does get blown on coke and hookers. Whereas if you die with your keys, you have the maximal probability that it's going to people that share your values and the quality of your character and that kind of stuff, i.e. your purchasing power gets dissipated to all of them, right? And, you know, and then you think about, well, what am I going to leave my children? It's like, well, doesn't that place the emphasis then on their character and like all the things you do in your life, your interactions, and all the other whatever you might conjure up for that purpose? Doesn't it place the emphasis entirely on that, so that they have the type of character that can go out in the world and create value and accrue value to themselves? Because everyone has examples of this. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it's pretty darn close that like when you get given something, you obviously don't have to develop the requisite character to have received it on your own merit, right? And so do you corrupt someone's character by giving them things? And I think oftentimes the answer is probably yes. So what if all the value that you accrued through your own actions and the principles and values that animated them through your life, you were able to almost have those principles be retained by distributing the proceeds of having acted in a moral way, let's say, or aligned with certain principles, to all those other people that are doing something similar. And then you know, to your offspring and to the people you want to support, you recognize the importance and responsibility of supporting them in actually the best way possible. Because what is better, giving someone $10 million in Bitcoin, or giving them, you know, helping them cultivate a character that is going to allow them to go out into the world and face challenges and accrue value and contribute meaningfully and all that kind of stuff. I mean, the latter is obviously something better to bequeath someone, in my opinion. And so I wind up when I'm thinking this out, I wind up thinking like, yeah, fuck, I gotta die with my keys too, you know? And like, but again, it places the emphasis on making sure you do a bang up job being a father or a parent or a, you know, whatever, because you don't have that kind of get out of jail free card. It's like, well, I'm going to give you, you know, whatever $1 million in purchasing power when I die. So I can take my foot off the gas or take my eye off the ball. It's like, no, now it's like only there, but doesn't it seem like that's the way it should be? Like, what am I missing here?
Me personally, I think the correct thing to do is to, you know, yes, there has to be strong emphasis on the way in which you raise your children. And, you know, obviously, you know, spending a lot of time with them and raising them with the right values is paramount. And if you have let's say you were running a major corporation and, you know, you weren't there for your kid, and he became kind of you know, he was raised by nannies and he's kind of a brat and he does, you know, whatever, all the wrong things. And, you know, you're meeting him for the first time at 22 years old and there's nothing you can do to unring this bell, then yeah, that's a different situation. But if you're doing the hard work of parenting, and you're actually, you know, there in the trenches day in, day out, you're going to raise kids that are good kids. And I think the key to not letting them be corrupted by money is to corrupt them just a little bit. So you give them just enough money to do something dangerous and stupid and terrible with, and then you just say, go ahead. You know, you're 18, 19 years old. Here you go. Fuck it up. And then when they do fuck it up, you go, what did we learn? Right. And I think that we need to have a lot, you know, just much more of a traditional mindset around these types of roles and take our solemn duty much more responsibly as parents and as the progenitors of, you know, what comes next, and basically like the Bitcoin civilization that's coming after us, and really say, yeah, there's a process here by which you go from being, you know, a toddler who knows nothing, you know, wandering around babbling about, to being, you know, the next great future leader of our society. And we're going to take you through that process. We're not just going to like drop a windfall of cash on you and be like, figure it out, kid. Maybe you're good, maybe you're bad. I don't know. Right. That's stupid. That's not how it ever used to work. And it's not how it'll work going forward.
I think it's a great point. It's definitely not black or white, right? You don't need to die with your keys or give it all to your kids necessarily. There's somewhere in between. And properly raising your kids, I think, to what Hodl said, that makes a lot of sense, right? Give your 18-year-old son a slug of cash. Let him fuck it up. Let him accrue some wisdom. The only way you can accrue it, I think, is through the pain. And maybe by the time, you know, it comes for you to actually pass on your legacy wealth, you can make the decision based on that, right? Who is the character of your son or daughter or family at that time? And the other thing that came up for me there is, like, you know, in an accounting sense, unearned income is a liability. Like if someone gives you money, a deposit, and you haven't earned it yet, you actually carry that on your books as a liability. This is money someone gave me that I have not performed the services to earn yet. And as you perform those services over time, you decrement the liability and you increase revenue. You earn the revenue. It's kind of like the same thing if you pass on unearned wealth to your children, right? You're giving them a fucking liability, right? The liability in this case is they might destroy themselves or corrupt their own soul or blow it on hookers and coke, whatever the thing is. And so you as the carrier of those keys have to use your discernment and judgment and how to best allocate that. And I don't know, it's not clear. It's not clear cut, but I think the dying with your keys is almost like the safe bet, you know?
To me, what's more important here is look, like whatever we decide here, I have absolutely no say in the process whatsoever. You can give all of your Bitcoin to your children, or you can give none of it. I don't have a mechanism to exploit you and steal your money and redistribute it, because I believe that inheritance tax is a good thing and redistributing. I don't have a way to do that. And that's what's miraculous about Bitcoin, is the subjectivity of how to choose to spend your money becomes yours alone. whether you want to extend your dynasty or whether you want to engage in the classic process of potlatch, where you publicly destroy your wealth in front of other people to show just how powerful you are. It's totally up to you. And
Or
to me,
let's-
like, that's what's
But in this case,
miraculous.
you're not destroying it, right? You're not technically destroying it. It is a pro rata contribution to all holders. So it's like potlatch without the destruction.
Let's say also that your
Yeah.
kid is a shitbag, you know, who's a drug addict, but you have hope for the future, and so you decide to time lock the coins and skip your kid, and it's like, okay, they go to your kids, not you, stupid.
Well, even better is I give all of my Bitcoin to a selected group of individuals that I love and care about, so that when I die, they'll approach my son and be like, we are the key bearers of your father, and you have 7 tasks to complete on each continent in order to be able to unlock. Go and achieve your hero's journey.
That's not a bad idea either.
We really need.
That's
we need
totally how
more-
my son gets his money. They
we-
like,
we need more long-term Bitcoin organizations like this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like come,
But-
like come to your kids and like, you know what I mean? Like it's
Oh,
it's
that's
just
it's almost inevitable, and I think Eric
Yeah.
is serious. So it's at least
what
there's
do
going to
you
be
do?
one instance of it.
what did
But,
you
you
do
know-
when you became an adult? Please, oh, my dad sent me on this 4-year adventure that I had to go and slay a
Right.
dragon. Well, like a
You
kimono
know,
dragon. not
it's
a real
kind of
dragon.
like it's when I was backpacking South America in 2008. I was in Bolivia, and I met this guy who was becoming like a Mason. He was a German guy, and he was like a part of a Masonic lodge. And part of his initiation was to travel. He had to leave home with $5, €5, whatever, in his pocket. He had to wear this like traditional outfit the entire time, and he had to travel for like 3 months and just convince, work, whatever his way around. Now, I have no idea about the history of that particular thing, but it just makes me think of it, right? Like this is an old institution that has these like rites of initiation whereby you earn your keep, you earn your title, you earn your place in the organization, whatever. But with the dying with your keys, like it is, I think in a Bitcoin future, one, it's not just that you're spreading out around your wealth, but you're also like invigorating or empowering the economy of people that are oriented around those same principles, right? So like you're giving it more juice. And I think also in a Bitcoin world, those principles and values that you might inculcate in your offspring, let's say in your kids, what you use to refine their character, I think they would be even more rewarded as time goes on, as that becomes the base layer of the economy. And these, you know, we that corruption we were alluding to earlier, that gets dialed down, and then the virtues, you know, emerge more profoundly, or they're more rewarded, and that, you know, all of that kind of stuff. And so, I mean, there's this weird circularity to it. So like, even you're not giving it to them directly, and you're avoiding the pitfalls of doing that, but you're giving it to a system that's going to reward them based on those things that you've inculcated into their character, but by virtue of the way that you've raised them. And so, you know, in a sense, you're still giving it to them. You're just making them get it in a way that's not going to corrupt them, or that's, you know, has the least probability of corrupting them. And again, it might seem like a hardcore sort of activity, right? But like, if you really have faith in those things and you're a really dedicated parent, why would it be that hardcore? Why shouldn't an individual, you know, earn what they receive in the world? You've taught them how to convert their actions into value to others and to accrue the benefits of having done so. What's so bad about that? You know, and I say that as someone who has dreamt in the past about like what happens when you stack up like, you know, dynastic wealth, basically. And right, not every each successive member of the family has, you know, a larger and larger foundation with which to do things with. But again, I mean, that road seems rife with error and corruption and stuff like that. And history is littered with, you know, rich families that have gone off course for the same reason. So maybe it's the humble approach, but also what's ultimately best for the individual is that, you know, like feed the value you've accrued into the very system that's going to reward them for the values and character that you inculcate in them, or that you help them refine. And maybe that's the way to create the virtuous economy, let's say, society, culture, whatever.
I think
Hard
that
though.
Yeah,
You got
to me,
kids, man.
for some reason that notion just comes off to me as like communist, you know.
But
Everybody
why,
has to,
why would you think money is something better? I mean, I know I am being black and white here, and I know
Yeah,
neither
yeah.
of you are saying this, but like we do have, doesn't it seem like we have this natural inclination to think like money is the more important thing to bequeath to like family?
Yeah, I
Maybe
mean,
not, maybe not you guys, but like
no,
that's kind
I
of like,
agree with
if I give the money, I don't.
you. Yeah, knowing how to think and having principles and values is the more important thing to give your children, right? But that said, if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, or if I end up in the gulag with Eric, you know, I'd like for them to have the sats, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
because I want
yeah.
to be here, right?
Isn't it context dependent too, though? Because if we're in total
100%.
fiat hellscape, you can give them all the values and merit and all of this in the world, but
Right.
sats might be more useful, like in
Well,
a
and
That's
very
true too.
pragmatic
Yeah,
sense.
I think
that's true too.
one of the things is that like if we're successful, like we can only hope that this is something that our children can wrestle with. But for us, like it's very clear what our mission and purpose is. And if we're successful, like these conversations can actually happen in a meaningful way in the future. And furthermore, like this is one of the reasons that even though I talk about how Bitcoin seems to be the dynasty of a new political system, we have no idea what that thing looks like because it doesn't exist yet and we haven't seen the old system die yet. And so I think the most important thing is we lead through our action with our principles, which lucky for us, Bitcoin enables almost with pristine fidelity. And through that, the best I can hope is that our children will reflect on who and how we became badasses. Like, you know, I put my grandfather on a pedestal because of how much of an awesome man he was and how much he kicked ass in the world. And I want to emulate him. And hopefully through our actions here, we will get to frame that as well. But, you know, it's an open-ended question right now, of which I'm really excited the fact that we have a system that instead of us needing to come to some agreement about how socialist we want to be in regards to this or how fascist we want to be, that the system works, as far as I can tell, perfectly in order to do that into the future.
To
And that's
express
something
the
to
individual will. Yeah.
Yeah,
I think it, yeah, that's the crux of the whole matter, right? The fact that you get to choose and no one else's political opinion, thesis, whatever, doesn't fucking matter, right? Like, it matters absolutely zero. And that, I mean, to your point, Eric, that's something we should rejoice, right? That we have this new option space. This option space never existed before Bitcoin. And so now we get new problems to wrestle with, perhaps. Like, how are we going to deal with this? It's complicated. You know, do I die with them, give some, whatever? But, you know, what do they say? More money, more problems. I guess we get new money, new problems, right?
Right.
It's just.
By the way, oh, go ahead, Eric.
I was just going to say, to me, this is the evangelical nature of what Bitcoin is. Like evangelicism translates to good news in Latin. And like, this is the good news. We have law now. We have a way to get past the false legalized lawlessness, this rogue force of violence that the state represents, and replace it with true law. But that requires our courageousness and insistence to make the decision that this is our new form of wealth. And to me, as more and more people join our side, which it's very clear every day we become more powerful and the old system decays more, there will be a crossover point where this actualizes in a meaningful way as a true new institution that frames the political, that will be a threat to all nation states everywhere. And I think when that implicit recognition happens, that's where stuff's going to get really interesting. And that's where I'm going to hope that John and Rob are going to save us from the gulags.
I also think that, you know, in this new design space of, like, you know, sort of Rob was alluding to the possibilities that Bitcoin opens up, you know, sometimes we get in this like actually stupid sort of headspace of thinking about the old world and then just mapping Bitcoin onto it. It's like, yeah, the old world, but with Bitcoin. It's like, no, dude, Bitcoin is fucking alien technology. And there are so many new things and so much new design space out there. It is just endless fertile territory. You're looking at America in the 1500s. I mean, it's a lush, bountiful place where we can fill it with our thoughts and ideas and imaginations. And like, here's one example. Sometimes we think about custodians in Bitcoin. And it's either like you have the keys or a custodian has the keys and you're giving up full control. There's no reason that that needs to be the design heuristic that we're all using. Like you can have a gradient, right? And you can have collaborative models in between. And so there's all sorts of different key signature schemes and key hierarchies that can be employed so that it's not just black and white, you have the keys or I have the keys, right? And so, you know, you could like think, for instance, we could set up sort of a dynastic trust with a quorum of Bitcoiners, you know, like I'll put you guys on my quorum, right? And if my kids turn out shitty, it's like, well, John's key voted no, Eric's key voted yes, Rob's key voted no. So you're not getting the coins, kid. Like, sorry, that's just the way it is, you know. There's a lot of new stuff and awesome stuff that we can do. Yeah.
That's so true. I mean, that's why it's like you can't see too far in front of your nose with this stuff, right? Like, I mean, here we are just kind of having fun dreaming about future scenarios and what things are going to be like. But, you know, combined with the other technologies that are happening in the world today that have gotten a lot of press lately, i.e. AI, you know, like I totally agree. It's such a fundamental shift and so fundamentally different that we just don't have the frameworks to really be able to predict much.
Yeah, it's completely foreign to the way that the traditional financial system works. It doesn't work. Bitcoin doesn't work anything like the traditional financial system.
This goes back to the point we keep revisiting, I think, is this deep continuity between material incentives and human ethics, human institutions, right? When you swap out that base layer, like everything on top of it, you can't map the old world institutions onto Bitcoin world. Nothing reconciles. So
I
it's
mean,
mind-bending.
One of the things that I see is that like this totally new paradigm, like what I do see it having corollaries to is an individual having a true transcendental experience that converts them, because after that conversion, there's a radical new perspective of the world that allows for it to be totally different, yet somehow the same. And it's interesting because there's a passage from Walter Benjamin where he talks about what the world looks like after the eschaton. And he says everything is exactly the same, but slightly different. And that's one of the things about Bitcoin is that all of the same things that seemed so maniacal and hateful and destroying of humanity, there's now this strange little inversion that can happen where, just like how Bitcoin's this trap door out of the bottom of hell, it changes that perspective and it allows for an ability to us actually to rescue ourselves from the circumstances. And to me, like, this is the most important part, is that, like, very similar to the religious conversion, only you can do it. Like,
damn it.
That was a nice freeze.
Oh, maybe it's the real deal.
Oh, this is the real one. Oh, there he's back. He's back.
And that's why it'll save everything. Sorry, I can't review it again. I can't review it again.
I go back to oh, sorry.
I just want to finish that, like, this process of accepting it and understanding what it is truly a process of people coming to terms that the world isn't evil and maniacal and nihilistic. It's waiting for us to rescue it by empowering ourselves and taking true responsibility through understanding the truth of what nature is. Didn't lose me that time.
No, that was good.
I was going back to that question John asked way earlier. It's like, when were humans most free? Like, what era in history? And my mind initially snapped back to like hunter-gatherer, right? Where we're just actually completely fucking free, just dumped here on the earth. There's nothing to tyrannize you. But you're also not free in a sense in that world, right? We don't have the option space it opens up for us through innovation and technology, et cetera, right? You can't fly around the world. You can't do Zoom, whatever. And so maybe that world we move into that's exactly the same but slightly different is that, right? You go back to a world of hyper individual responsibility, which is what hunter-gatherer society was something like, I presume. I wasn't there. Yet you have this difference of the possibility of innovation and collaboration and all the things that we can do interdependently. So it's like it's honoring human independence. You know, Bitcoin's enshrining life, liberty, and property in the most profound way that we know how, but it's also enabling this hyper interdependence at the same time.
I was going to say, you know, something that's interesting is I think we all lived through a profoundly free period when we were children. I think that the 90s was one of the freest times, you know, as a decade time span from, you know, whatever, 1986 or so until 2001 when the towers fell. That was an incredibly free time. And like, you know, the minute the Berlin Wall goes down and, you know, the Cold War ends with the USSR nuking itself and America views itself as the uniparty, it's like, there's no threats anymore. And so we can all just be free. We can be free to do commerce with each other. We can be free to say what we want, associate with who we want. And like having a taste of that as a child and then having it ripped away from me. Yeah, I want it back, man. And I will do anything to get it back. And I'm fighting to get it back. And that I'm not going to stop until we achieve that because it was the best of times. And like, I'm not going to just go down with the ship. No way.
It was so fucking good. Super soakers
So
and sour
good.
candies and Nerf guns and shit like that. But I do
Like
wonder,
around the
like,
neighborhood.
is that just romanticizing our childhood? Like, would someone born in the 60s or the 70s or whatever do the same because it's such an innocent period for us? That's our experience of it, or what?
I think that I've heard the baby boomers romanticize their childhood in the 1950s, and obviously that was an economically prosperous time, but culturally that was a very repressive time. Whereas I feel like the 90s were culturally kind of open. It was kind of like, yeah, whatever, anything goes. Who cares? You know, The Matrix came out in 1999. Think about it. That's all I'm saying.
I'd answer your question, John, with you know, the religious idea that in Eden, there was no language. God pointed and things actualized immediately. And it was the moment that Eve bit into the apple that knowledge was imparted. And now this linguistic super language of God exploded. And since we've been dejected from Eden, we've struggled with this same language problem ever since. And what I'd also point out is Bitcoin seems to actualize its ability to go into this same place, this same state that allows for us to create a totally new and different form that, you know, rescues our souls from a place that doesn't want us to have a soul or even identify that we aren't materialistic things. And to me, this is like the state of what understanding being is. Like being is this non-material thing that exists inside you and is eternal. And we don't understand that because our money is so broken and the society that we came from is so broken. So
Yeah. You know, Rob's point about, you know, when was the freest time? I romanticize about the Minoan period all the time, right? Because it apparently it seems like they had very few armaments. It was a civilization around 4,000 or 5,000 years ago on Crete. You know, very few armaments, very few like defensive anything, high culture, great food,
It's amazing.
like frescoes, all this kind of stuff. Just, you know, looked like paradise basically. But to Rob's point, it's like, you know, maybe it's this tension always between individuality and the oppressive forces beyond yourself. They may be other people, they may be nature, they may be hunger, all that kind of stuff. There's just nothing but oppression in the chaos, basically. And up till this point, or up till 2009, let's say, I mean, maybe it was always just trade-offs, right? And maybe you think of trade-offs as being like, you have the trade, right? You're engaging with the natural world, or you're saying to your peers, let's form a hierarchy to protect ourselves and all this kind of stuff. And what you're getting is security, but the literal trade off, like the trade that's happening outside of the primary trade, is the potential for corruption of that structure, of the people that you're entrusting to protect you, of the people with the swords, all that kind of stuff. And maybe Bitcoin is this thing, you know, kind of in keeping with this idea that it resolves opposites, that just maybe not eliminates, you know, forever, but dramatically reduces the trade-offs that we have to accept or contend with to optimize individuality and optionality, right? And it seems like that's the case.
It's good. So as you said, the chaos, it's like the domain of all oppression, right? In the sense, even in the hunter-gatherer age where you're free from any tyrannical institution, you're still subject to the tyranny of the guy with the biggest stick, right? You encounter him anywhere in the jungle, and that's that. But it's also where all the novelty lives, right? You have to go into the chaos to get the new things, to explore the new territory, to use a Petersonian term. And it's fascinating with Bitcoin being this resolution of opposites. We keep talking about justice, and I think there's a deep connection between justice and just private property, right? Like
Mhm.
We've talked about this a million times. Like if justice is people getting what they deserve and property is people keeping what they earn, then like property is justice. Basically, you get to extend your life force into the real world, keep it, trade it, etc. And Bitcoin's this weird reconciliation of, I guess, the potential tyranny that comes with any collective. Like we need to form collectives to have interdependence, but you run the risk of that collective tyrannizing the individual, let's say. So we always have this threat of the public, right, on the private sphere, or the collective on the individual. But Bitcoin's like a public utility in a way. It's universally accessible, just open network, but it facilitates trade flows of perfect private property. So it's like it's bridged these two things into one new foundational layer. And like Hodl was saying, right, it's just fucking open, fertile territory. It's like, go forth, young man, and build. Like, do
Well,
like
it's interesting. It does it through inverting the state as we understand it. Like that same collectivized form used to, actualize itself through auctoritas, not the fact legitimum, that authority, not truth, creates legitimacy. And so through us using cryptography to invert that function, to have truth, not authority, creates legitimacy, it opens up this totally new territory of, like an inverted collectivism that through taking the most extreme aspects of fascist theory, i.e., Satoshi Nakamoto's unilateral declaration, and bonding that to a total communist ideology that all units have total equality with each other, it creates a Hegelian synthesis where the thesis and the antithesis fuse together to create a totally new object. And that new object, furthermore, is the thing in itself. So as we try to wrestle with terms with it, we can never actually really get to it other than just wrestle with it.
Right.
And eventually that has us understand, oh, this is an idea, that's a form of knowledge. And now that we get it as a holistic idea, we turn back to it and see it in our world illuminated through this new perspective that we have, that the knowledge imparts to us as, frankly, divine revelation when it finally hits like a lightning bolt.
Right. Which is back to the Neoplatonism, right? Like the one, the thing you can't talk about, thing beyond words, the good, God. And so I don't know, I guess, like, is Bitcoin like the first platonically perfect thing we've ever created? Like it's the first absolute, right? The first unchangeable thing we've ever created.
Another interesting wrinkle, going back to someone mentioned psychedelics earlier, but another concept in Neoplatonism is kenosis, right, which is union with the one. And pretty much, every religion has some notion of this union with God or nirvana or this kind of stuff. And I'll throw it out there because I think I'm talking to the right people, but these sorts of, maybe you can't unify with Bitcoin, the network, but Bitcoin, the concept, the idea, all these things that we're trying to wrestle with, the meaning of it, all that, the stuff that can't be nailed down, the stuff that only ever resolves in another paradox in a certain way. The extent to which some people that I've talked to at least, that in attempting to integrate that, it's kind of induced a kind of mystical experience. I don't think, too many people have been public about them, but I've heard, several stories at this point where that seems to be happening. Right. And maybe, and it kind of makes sense, right? The illusion to psychedelics would be something akin to, you introduce something into your mind that opens up the aperture or changes the receiver wavelength or however you characterize it. And it's so, it's so overwhelming, and it's so, demolishes your more rigid, typical perspective. The reason why we have the term like mind blowing or mind expansion is because it's that information has had such a huge impact, such a huge effect. And, whatever the information distilled in the psychedelic experience is, whatever those compounds or molecules unlock to receive that information. I mean, I don't think we really have too much knowledge on that at this point, but maybe it's something similar, that simply when, something unlocks, whether it's a molecule, another piece of knowledge or whatever, it unlocks something within you and you get flooded with information about that thing. And it ends up dramatically expanding and likely reforming forevermore your perspective. And as crazy as it sounds, that seems to be happening to at least some people around this object that we're discussing in Bitcoin.
What I find so fascinating is, and we've used this analogy a couple times, is like when you unlock it, and like the only way that you can unlock it is like with the right private key. You have to have the right knowledge to unlock this and unveil what its truth is. And there's a really great quote about Kafka's castle, and about how K at the foot of the castle, without the key to the scripture, like it remains this institution that's like fully pervades over all of life in the village itself, and there's no possibility outside of it unless you have that key that is the scripture that then helps you understand the rest of the parable. And I can't help but think this is sort of like the meta encryption that's going on, and this is also one of the reasons that like this thing that we seem to be professing as this deep spiritual, and you know, I've even said messianic object. And it seems to me very peculiar that the only way you decrypt it and understanding in that way is through this generalized religious approach that literally acts as a decrypting mechanism to understand what the nature of the world is vis-a-vis truth, because this brings back truth into accounting in the most literal way, and done through like the most superfluous and base bullshit thing, money, like the thing that seems to be the most icky.
Yeah. Because in like, again, back to Platonism, they considered money to be filthy lucre, they call it, right? It was like this thing that like a necessary evil we had to deal with. So even we built Western civilization on Neoplatonism largely, yet they had this disregard for money. So it's interesting that money is the thing we fixed, that fixed Western civilization. Like it's so fucking, and I just, on the point of the unlocking, I think it's also the locking, right? There's another interesting piece, because you are Bitcoin, really. Like if you know your private keys and you die with your private keys, you've performed a network operation, right? You've put those things in permanent fucking time lock, and that's propagated purchasing power. So there's an unlocking to Bitcoin, but there's also this strange option of being able to permanently lock it, that like with your own life, right? Like Socrates dying for his own principles, he can actualize them. So you can die with your own keys and you can actualize this. You're taking the philosophy and making it livable, or making it pragmatic, something like that.
Or at a minimum, and this relates back to dying with the keys conversation, and maybe this is a step too far, but you kind of, by whatever means you accrued those Bitcoins, and let's say for the sake of this discussion, it was like through, moral principled behavior that other people valued, and therefore they were, rewarding you in that way. If you die with it, so you pass it on, and again, the hookers and blow situation with your potential offspring. But if you die with it, do you not kind of immortalize like the principles behind the actions that you use to accrue it, right? Because like, do not those principles have a longer staying power, dissipating slowly through everyone else in the network, rather than potentially being used for more nefarious, like less virtuous behavior if you bequeath them directly to one individual? So in that sense, to your point, Rob, like maybe you are able to bundle up, the spirit behind your behavior for which you were rewarded. Maybe you are able to bundle that up and like send it through space and time for a far greater period of time by dying with your keys than by, intentionally giving them to someone.
By the way, you can just time lock too. You don't have to die with your keys. You can just time lock. I keep saying that.
We're dying with our damn keys.
I was playing this thing out in my mind. Like, what happened if this really got serious and everyone starts dying with their keys? Like, we just end up with very few fucking sats or microsats floating around for whoever's left. And
we have to add a few more decimal points there.
Yeah.
That's when the plebs really do run the world. When
I'll point out
0.1 Bitcoin. Yeah.
That makes it sacred though, because now you have an entire class of people that could spend Bitcoin and they choose not to. They cement it into that reality that's unchangeable and will exist forever. And I can't help but think when we're hitting block 3 million, that people will turn and look at that and go, holy shit, John Vallis died with his Bitcoin. And you can see it right there. No one will ever be able to move that again. And to me, like, this is how we represent the total potentiality of Bitcoin. That's through this interesting double turning of like the refusal to spend and do something, because that shows that we have the power to do it. It's this statement of, I would rather not. I could spend my Bitcoin, but I won't.
I'm not saying
think-
don't spend it when living, just to be clear. This is more of a after death sort of thing. But Eric, what you're saying there does make me think of this notion of like a living cathedral, right? Because cathedrals are these places where those values, principles, virtues, all the other stuff that's wrapped up in that is like they're to be put on display, to be worshiped, to be experienced. And it's kind of a similar thing, except I say living because you're taking those same things and you're pushing them through a network that actually will empower action in line with those things. You know, so if this became a thing and like, you know, you spend Bitcoin, you use it in your life, we're on a Bitcoin standard, but when you die, you know, all your accrued value over the course of your life was just injected back into that, you know, that it's almost like putting a brick in that cathedral wall, as it were. And, you know, who knows where it ends up ultimately.
Well, and upon your death, like it becomes this super badass statement of glory of being like, look, like John Vallis dies and like he sacrifices his, you know, however many Bitcoin to the cause. And like, here's his eulogy that's embedded in it and all this other shit. And I think that's really profound, and it returns people to a sense of personal self-control and responsibility for their future and posterity in a way that is not accessible vis-a-vis the form of the state, you know, like, and to me, like, this is one of the most horrifying things about modernity is that like our literal legacies have been crushed out and forgotten. Like, I don't think that there's a person on the planet now that could extend themselves back 50 generations. And to like, keep in mind, like Brutus, who murdered Caesar, like he was the 107th of his lineage to be part of the Roman Senate. Like, think of how fucking crazy that is. They had a lineage that traced back linking 107 generations. There isn't a human on earth today that could do that. Yeah. And that goes to show what happens when we destroy this capacity to have legacy and the ability to be bonded to that. And the state has fundamentally destroyed that because there is no capacity to protect your family vis-a-vis wealth, because the Commonwealth has nothing to do with a Commonwealth at all anymore. It has to do with a subjection of all people to a form of poverty that we can only experience in modernity.
Are you sure on those numbers? That's to be like 5,000 years of fucking history, wouldn't it be? If 107 generations?
Like it's like 700 years, I think.
People only used to live like 20 years or something.
Because the Roman Republic, I think, started at the end. I think it was like 454 BC or something.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
You know, and Brutus like they
was...
murdered Caesar, I think, in 30 AD, maybe. My numbers aren't quite right, but like it's a long fucking time. So
they kept track of their lineage, I guess, is the point.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of, actually, this is a nice segue to my final comment, and then we can bring it to a close. But Eric, you mentioned your grandfather before, and it made me think, you know, our conversation before about orange pilling and, you know, just living it out rather than trying to persuade everyone. I mean, I think for many people, their grandfather is like king shit, right? Like certainly the case for me. Like mine was everything you'd want to be in a person. He was it, you know, strong, courageous, gentle, successful, generous, like just war veteran, all that kind of stuff. And what it made me think of when you said it was like, he never once tried to convince anyone of anything that he believed. He just lived it the fuck out, had an amazing life, built an amazing family, was respected, humor, like the whole 9 yards, social, all that kind of shit, just knocked it out of the park in life. And he never once tried to convince you of his philosophy or his political stance or anything. So maybe there's some wisdom in that.
I think of my grandfather in much the same terms, and he was a World War II vet, and he gave me the greatest compliment and the greatest insult of my life back to back when he said, you know, you would have been an amazing fighter pilot back when it was all guts and glory. And I said, what about nowadays? He goes, nowadays you gotta be smart to fly these planes.
Yeah, well, again, speaking of like mimicry, right? I mean, mimicking those that are successful and that being the most powerful motivator. I mean, I think grandfathers are probably pretty instructive in that regard.
Oh, dude, I have this pin from my grandfather's of the Air Force before it was the Air Force. It's one of my prized possessions. You know what I mean? It's just like, and I hope we can all be remembered in those terms and do something that's that significant and that meaningful. And I think it says probably something that none of us mentioned our fathers, you know, that like maybe we didn't feel the same way about their lives as we did about our grandfathers' lives, right? Sometimes there's a lost generation that like they just kind of squander their potential, and you hope you're not one of those generations. You hope you're doing something meaningful. I think that's why we're all here being focused on money. I didn't, you know, anticipate being focused on money as a core something I was going to do with my life, but here we are because this is the most important thing that's happening. You know,
I mean, we're cursed by the actions of our fathers, but blessed by the wisdom of our grandfathers.
Yeah.
You know, and
That,
I think
that being said, I love you, Dad.
that being said, Dad, if you watch this, I'm still alive, and maybe you can make a phone call. Just a thought. Well, you know, and like this goes back to like part of the general atrophy and decay of society is like one of the things I've been doing a lot of work around is coming to terms with the fact that, you know, like I was abandoned in the deepest sense that there is. Like I didn't have a father, and that's like a shared reality that many people have, and that's part of why society is atrophied. Like, you know, one of the things I've had to come to terms with is like I didn't have strong male role models to model, and so like I've had to figure out how to do that for myself and what it means, and it's been lots of wrestling and difficulty. And I think the truth is that we now have the extra breathing room to take the responsibility of the way because of what Bitcoin offers us in a way that, you know, as much as I might have my own problems with my father, I have deep empathy towards the world he was born in and the circumstances, and, you know, why he was fundamentally a failure as a father and wouldn't be able to reach the capacity for that, you know. And one of the things that makes me lucky is I have the ability to spend time with my children and to raise them and love them in a way that I didn't get. And that helps solve things. And again, like it seems ridiculous, but the only reason that that happened was because of Bitcoin. And to be clear, like I served my time. Like I was upside down on my investment in Bitcoin for a long time, and I continued to be paid in it. And it became this thing between me and my partner where we're like, if Bitcoin ever gets to $1,000, like, oh my God, like, thank God, but just gotta hope and keep plugging away. And I think that this is a really important idea that I keep seeing a criticism. People go, well, what if Bitcoin goes, well, like one Bitcoin's still one Bitcoin. You have a subjective ability to choose when and where to spend your Bitcoin. And that's a deeply and powerful thing when we know that there's only 21 million and it can't be inflated to infinity. So I guess kind of long way of linking that back to my grandfather is that Bitcoin allows for us to be closer to the values that they had because of the sort of economic reality that they lived in. You know, like I think our grandfathers were able to be badasses because fiat hadn't fucked everything up to such a maniacal way. You know, my grandfather had 8 children. How the fuck are you going to raise 8 children in this day and age? And he did it on a teacher's salary. And my grandmother did not work.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
Well,
you know, and so it's important to remember that stuff and to get back to like, this is how we also deny the Malthusian idea is that like, there's infinite potential for the world and what we can create together, but not with a fucking broken money.
You ever hear people say, you know, dumb bullshit like, I couldn't have a kid now, not with the way the world is. It's like people had children during the Blitz in London. Shut the fuck up. Shut up. Like, this is nothing. You have Netflix. There's an app that brings food to your delicious food right to you. Shut up.
Like, this is such an anti-humanist, like it's such a fucking disgusting perspective because like you're literally rolling over on the whole of humanity, being like,
right,
can't raise decent people. I guess that's the end of my lineage. And like,
it's hard. It's hard, Eric. It's so hard now.
Yeah. Well, and like there's this fucking arrogance that comes up, like I get to have 2 incomes and no kids to spend. And I'm like, look at how your fiat rot has destroyed your brain, because when you're alone in a convalescent home, desperately wanting someone to talk to. Again, I had 2 incomes, that rare. Like, you fucking moron. Like, think this shit through.
This is another one of my things is like, you know, Bitcoiners have gotten this bad reputation of being like toxic or whatever. And it's like, really, like, we are very grandmotherly. Like, this is all very grandmother advice. Like, you know, have children, start a family, have some conviction, stand for something, join your local community organizations. This is what your grandmother would have told you. And we're telling you this today, you know what I mean? Because grandma was right. Like, these are the keys to a good life. The meaning crisis, I don't have a meaning crisis in my life. I have kids. They are my meaning. when, you know, you meet your child for the first time, you're just like, oh yeah, every fucking thing in my life led me to this moment. Boom, right here.
Yeah.
You don't have to go around questioning yourself all the time. What does it mean? What kind of apartment should I live in? What kind of plan? You know, it's like when he's in Fight Club, when he's like scrolling through the, you know, he's endlessly watching infomercials and scrolling through IKEA catalogs. What kind of artisan handcrafted bowls define me as a person? It doesn't fucking matter. That's why Tyler Durden blows up his fucking apartment. It doesn't matter.
Well, I'm like like, yeah, it's fucking hard, but you know what it does? It molds you into who you're supposed to become. And like it's a very definitive juncture point. Like, I'm a different person now that I'm a father, because my heart lives outside of my body. And I understand that I have a responsibility to the future, not just because I want the future to be better. I want the future to be better for them.
Yeah.
You know, and like that's not something I could have accessed otherwise. And again, like, I don't want to be critical of people who are choosing not to have children, but again, it's just like rubbing it in people's face and acting like it's some sort of moral superiority. Like it's not, and that's what pisses me off.
Yeah, and I don't judge people that choose not to become parents by any means, to each their own, but I do think, I didn't know this until becoming a parent, but to actually have life beyond yourself, you can get versions of it. I think being in Bitcoin is kind of a version of it, right? We get so into this thing because we have this life beyond ourselves with what Bitcoin can do for humanity and all of these future prospects. But to directly look into the eyes of your child, I mean, that is the physical embodiment of living life beyond yourself. So, and people have done great things that haven't had children too, right? They've contributed to charities and built, you know, big things for other people. It's serving other people, helping other people.
Right.
That's where you get meaning in life. It's the participatory aspect of it.
Right.
And I guess parenthood is just the greatest instance of that participation.
I think it's a Jordan Peterson line where, you know, he says, you know, people say they're not going to have kids or whatever, and, you know, kids would interfere with, you know, their life. And it's like, what are you doing? What are you doing that's so damn important? Nothing.
It's the exact opposite.
Well, what could be more important, right? I mean,
there's nothing more important.
Definitionally,
There is nothing more important than the future. And like, this is one of the problems with fiat, is that fiat is stealing from the future for the present.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that is when you've thrown an error in the blockchain of humanity. The
Mm-hmm.
future is always more important than the present. Always. That will always be true. And so in order to, you know, have meaning in the present, you have to be doing positive things for the future.
yeah.
It's just that simple.
Forward. I think another Peterson trope is happiness is forward movement toward that which is meaningful, something to that effect.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, Eric, you often talk about rescue and recovery, and like, again, we take this thing in Bitcoin, and whether it's, you know, you kind of charting a different path than your father charted with you, or with all the other things that we might engage in as a result of being rescued, illuminated, you know, whatever, by Bitcoin. I mean, it's like, it is this revival or re-elevation or first time instantiation of the capacity to pursue meaning, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so like Bitcoin is obviously going to allow you to be more secure in your life. That means you're going to be able to have larger families and more kids and be a part of your community and, you know, support those who you care about that are less, you know, less fortunate or whatever, you know. So it's just, again, it's what's the solution to the meaning crisis? I mean, we've discussed a lot of them, but in terms of the new novel thing that wasn't here before, because, you know, having children was always on the table, obviously, it's Bitcoin, right? For the world as it is today and the way that things have changed and where we're at and all the problems, the solution to the meaning crisis, the new solution would seem to be Bitcoin. And isn't it amazing that it's casting a more favorable light on prior solutions to the meaning crisis and re-elevating them in the culture and in minds and giving people greater capacity to pursue them?
Yeah, I mean, we're returning back to the classic beginning, and it's no wonder, because we're returning to truth, you know. And so of course it's going to illuminate these same ideals. And like, look, like, I don't want to shit on people who don't raise kids. It's just like, to me, it's a short-term thinking of that. Like, you literally have not considered what your death will look like and who will be around you. And like that is short-term thinking, and you should deeply reconsider that. If you have, great, good for you. I'm happy for you. But you know, to me, like the solution to this meaning crisis, it's not just us, it's like everybody. And to me, like, this is why I get religious about this shit, is because at the end of the day, I sincerely think that this is a spiritual cause to rescue humanity from the clutches and evil that statism represents.
Mhm.
And like, while this sounds big and crazy, I've pointed out pedantically in this podcast that like the state is intrinsically linked to the most horrific crimes that have ever been conducted in humanity and continue to happen. You know, like I've been thinking more and more about the idea of digital human rights in the way that the full-scale surveillance, like this is a crime against all of humanity. And this is something that fundamentally stands outside of jurisdictional law because it involves everyone. In the same way that, you know, the reasons why all nation states used to kill pirates is because they represented the same thing. They were a crime against humanity because of the way it attacked the ability for people to conduct commerce freely and fairly under the concourse of law. Ergo, they were the enemy of all humanity. And this is where we're at today. And it turns out that Bitcoin it has the tools within inside of it to defeat this thing, i.e. cryptography. It turns out that in the digital world, cryptography becomes the preeminent tool of war, which to be clear, to get away from Laurie's thesis, is fundamentally different from a weapon. It is a tool of war, but not a weapon.
Mm.
Oh, Lowry. Is that who you're referring to?
Yeah. Sorry about that.
I was going to bring it up earlier, but like what I do really like about Lowry's thesis is just the only law that we were all equal in is the laws of physics, basically, historically. And Bitcoin is that allowed us to integrate this money or social institution or super language object into physics directly and make something equally unchangeable. So there's something very profound in that.
Yeah, I don't think he's wrong. I just don't like its framing.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Actually, I don't like the word weapon, but again, beyond language, right? It's tool of war, even tool of war. It's like, well, war in what domain? Like what war? It's a spiritual war, I guess. Like,
I mean, like this is for me, like this is where it becomes fucked up and highlights why it's so important today. Is because it unveils this nature that, in my opinion, since World War II, we've actually been under a total global civil war that is about fundamentally capturing all people and controlling them. And so when you stand back and go, we're already at war and you live inside a fucking open air prison camp, and I happen to have a tool that could help you maybe escape, but you got to fucking run for the fences, bro. Like I can't do that for you. And also, like, I don't guarantee it's going to work. You may very well get fucking shot on the way out. I'm really sorry, but you know that, and you can do this, or you can think that their promise of work will make you free will do that. But it's about exploiting you, using you up so that when you finally are done with being able to work, they can throw you away like garbage.
Damn it. I thought we were going to end on a nice grandma's advice note.
Well, with that being said, that is the choice in front of you. And there's a fucking gap in the fence and we're about to go through selection.
Yeah.
Like I'll distract the guard and you can run, man. Because like
make
I'm
a run for the
fence.
fences by visiting swanbitcoin.com.
No, the other way. God damn
it. Sponsored by Swan.
Well, and like,
Gentlemen.
and this sounds dramatic up until you find yourself in a place where like you're in Kiev and your city is being bombed and you have to run away immediately and you don't know if you have anything, or you have 12 words in your head that despite as horrific as things have happened, you can start over again.
Yeah, it becomes super fucking real when that kind of shit actually happens, right?
Yeah, and
Which
like
is
to be
why,
clear,
you know,
like I think circumstantially people can find themselves in situations where their life is threatened in a number of ways, you know, and I think it's really interesting to think about the number of people that have had their bank account shut down the moment that they say something that is non-political. And to me, like, this is what I'm trying to point out, is that we all exist in this state where we can be labeled an enemy combatant and stripped of all of our rights immediately. And that's outside of our control or purview. You know, like what happens if you have a second cousin that flips out and goes fucking postal? And then the feds show up and they're like, oh, you like gave him Bitcoin that he used to buy weapons. Huh, interesting. The difference is now you can actually use that Bitcoin to get the fuck out, as opposed to when you have frozen bank accounts and everything else.
Yeah, the great debanking is coming. You know, there's going to be a time where, you know, just scores of people are debanked randomly because they're politically being non-person. And then I think we're also going to go through some type of algorithmic sort, you know, because there's so much data on everybody that you're not going to be able to convert out of your ideology. So whatever ideology exactly ends up being the dominant ideology and it runs roughshod over everybody else, they're going to sort you and they're going to be like, yeah, sorry, John, we got enough podcast hours of you thinking thoughts that aren't approved, you know, get in the gulag with Eric, right?
Yeah, well, fuck it. I'm hopeful and things are good. And yeah, I mean, isn't it amazing that we, you know, like we alluded to earlier, that we were probably all kind of divergent when we were younger, you know, maybe not jiving with norms from the very beginning. But isn't it fucking cool that like those things that otherwise, you know, may have destroyed us or at least caused us a tremendous amount of despair, because we would have been as, you know, aware of the problems of the world and fuck all to do about it. And here we are with this tool that seems like not only, I mean, you couldn't have conceived of a better tool. Had you asked us all, like, you know, pre-2009, like, what's the way to fix the world? Like, we would have drawn a blank probably, other than some stupid, like, well, you know, get this guy in power or shove 10 grams of mushrooms down every world leader's, you know, gullet and have that be like a necessity when you take office. Like, yeah, maybe that would help. But, you know, here we are with something beyond our wildest dreams that has the capacity to have a positive impact beyond our wildest dreams, as we've been saying. So I'm fucking jazzed as shit. And I love talking with you guys as usual. Any last words before we shut it down?
As dark as I am, I just need to clarify that, like, I'm extremely, extremely hopeful, and I feel really great. And Bitcoin's going to save the world and liberate all of us and show humanity what it means to return to truth. And it's really, really wonderful. I just have to pound this drum pedantically that, like, we are in the middle of an extreme crisis. And what Hodl was talking about, the great debanking, like, that's fucking selection, man. Like, that's what's going to happen. And when you're at that point, you are now in the camps, and the chance of getting out is fucking slim, man. So that's the only reason I'm pedantic about drumming how dark the things is just because I want people to get the fuck out and know there is a real solution. So that's my last word.
When I reflect on what an amazing gift Bitcoin is, I also end up thinking about all the amazing gifts that it's given me. You know, this fellowship being one of them, introduction to ways of thinking and people and opportunities, and like it's become it really does. I don't think we can separate us from Bitcoin, right? Like we're core components of its operating system. And damn, it feels good to be a Bitcoiner.
Amen.
Yeah. I think, man, I always really just enjoy talking to you guys. And you know, we are like a bunch of misfits that found our way into this thing. And you know, when you join Bitcoin, you're not just a loser who's been displaced by society. You're a loser in an epic poem about history, you know?
Well, it turns out that you're the hero that's here to rescue yourself from the circumstances and the hero's journey that you have to experience. And
there's no one coming to save you. You got to save you.
Here's to all being losers in an epic poem. Gents, we'll talk soon. Love you all.
Love you guys.
Love you guys much. See y'all soon.